So this is the 2022 Stampers Anonymous release. Contains 5 cling-mounted stamp sets, not including this one, because this is the one that I was just talking about. Our layering stencils, mini stencils, and element stencils. All right, we're going to get into it. So cling-mounted rubber, again, I do love the detail of this, and so I'll talk about both of these. It's so funny when you have a little camera glitch. So
like I'm drinking.
I know. Well, listen, Floral Elements, the new one, this is CMS 445. This is the new one, is the same artist that designed these floral outlines. And I love this set because, again, it was all these wonderful bouquets that you could stamp and color and do all sorts of great things with imagery. And I love the little scribbly sketch of it. You can use elements of it. And this artist also offered these existing elements that these were created by as single stamps. And I wasn't sure initially when I was going to even launch this design, whether people would understand what to do or how to use these elements. And that's why I started with these arrangements. But once I saw that you guys were, creating so many cool things in the background, these elements were next. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to use this set. It's very cool, very convenient. For the most part, these florals are to scale of the ones that are actually in the bouquet, right? So if you like that scale. But then there's also some additional floral elements that are not in any of these outline arrangements. So, there's just some bonus pieces and a great set to work with, right? Then probably, well, I think I have a lot of favorites in this release, but this one is Noteworthy. And this is just something that I've always wanted, just very, very simple sentiments. I do a lot of this in the ideology line with stickers, right, or any of the word plaques, but I've always wanted to do it in stamps. And I know that this kind of thing isn't for everyone, but I think it is for everyone, because whether you're doing tags, cards, junk journal, mixed media, whatever that is, I like the fact that there's just some little handwritten sentiments, right, where the quote is bold enough that it's going to show up well with ink, right, because it needs to show up over a background. It's also great for embossing. But these are things that, they're not your typical, happy birthday, thank you kind of thing. They're just great statements, give yourself permission. Maybe that's something you need, right, in your journal, or maybe that's something you need to send to a friend, right, or focus on the good, own your dreams, be fearless, stop overthinking, right? I say that all the time. And yeah, I mean, people have asked for Timisms. I'll never probably do a set of Timisms, but there are some in here, you do you. I do like a lot of things. Be authentic. Limited edition, that even can go on the back of things that you make or stamp. Blessed are the curious, because I do think it's important to be curious, or love you, collect beautiful moments. Again, some of these you'll see from stuff we've done with ideology. I love this one, be you, the world will adjust. So we'll talk about a lot of these stamps, and I'll even go back to kind of this set as well. If a stamp set has a bazillion different stamps, right, because these are manufactured in Cleveland, Ohio, I try to yield as much as I can on a set. And so if I pack a lot of imagery on a set, right, it is really time consuming for Stampers Anonymous to go in and actually what we call weed the stamp set. Well, I don't call it, they call it that. That would be the official term. And weeding is where you go in and take out this outer rubber, because all of these are die cut, right? Some people, like if it's a big enough element like this one, I'll talk about the next one, that's easy to weed because it's 4 stamps, they rip it off you go. But if it has a lot of pieces, it's very time consuming, and sometimes you have really small little stamps, like love you, or on this one, you have this really skinny stamp that, although it does have clean cushion, it's very easy to just fall off of your stamp set. So some people prefer to leave that part in there so you can plug in that piece of rubber, and some people like to take that off. It doesn't matter. It's completely up to you. So if it bothers you to always stick those back in, just peel these off, and if you keep your stamps in a binder or something, if this falls off, at least the binder is going to catch it, right? All right. So on these, there again, for me, I'm probably going to weed the set when I'm done, because to me, I think they have enough surface, so I'll probably peel this off. It's just going to be easier, I think, also for my eyes to see the break in between the writing. But a great set. This is CMS 446 Noteworthy. Now, a popular one for the makers, and so far what I've seen on social as well, is this one called Botanical Collage. And it's a great set that has just some really unique kind of text in the background and these beautiful images layered over the top. Great for collage, great for coloring, right? A beautiful flower there. Another butterfly off to the side here, and another flower. 4 great botanicals, and when you see how these are used, it's a good one. It's a real good one. and I can see why it was a fan favorite for the makers. But again, this one, I will do a shout out to Ted once again, because this set, this is Eccentric. This was inspired by the remnant rubs I did for Ideology. And when I launched those rubs, I maybe even said it during the live, I'm not sure, but I said this would make a great stamp set, right? The remnant rubs for Ideology are a smaller scale of all this stuff. They're much smaller because they go on a sheet. But I loved all of these little random elements. These are all things that I've gathered from receipts or ephemera or all sorts. It's just very, very eclectic. I freaking love this set. But you can see how much I packed into this sheet, right? So remember, these are cut with a steel die. So the fact that this blade is so close, so yeah, maybe a little bit of that screen image is a little off. Don't freak your freak about that. It is what it is. The stamp is still going to be intact because we want to cut it as close as possible. But this was definitely a feat for the team at Stampers Anonymous to let me do that, because really the last set, and I thought that was a lot, was Field Notes. Again, another favorite where it had a lot of elements. And I remember when I first presented this to Ted, he's like, oh, that's a lot of stamps. I'm like, that's okay, we can do it. And we did it, but you can see that, you know, you compare the two, this one's like a parking lot. You have so much space in between these. This, not so much. So I really wanted to up it. It has just some cool details that you can use on tickets or on photos or all sorts of little accents. Just absolutely incredible. And what a great value to have all of these stamps on a set. So I do love Eccentric, but really when I talk about favorites, this would be my favorite. And I'll show you at the end, there's going to be a demo to tell you exactly why I did it. This did take a little bit of convincing for Ted, you know, that I wanted to do one stamp on a set. That was it. And he's like, you know, normally, traditionally, your backgrounds are 2 sets. Is that a value? I wanted this big. I wanted this bigger than an A2 card. I wanted this bigger than a number 8 tag. I wanted it big for a lot of different reasons and how we use it. And I'll show you that in the demo. This particular stamp, this is called Bubbles. And you can see, I mean, look at that detail in the rubber, because you can get so much texture, all the little fade. This particular one, because it's such a weird size, comes with its own grid block. This is packaged together, right? Because it's such a weird stamp, none of the grid blocks fit it. And I do think it is important to have a block for this particular stamp and how I use it. So again, a shout out to Stampers Anonymous for including this and still keeping that great MSRP for the rubber stamp set. So this is Bubbles, and you'll see, like, so good. So many ideas for this one. All right. Then we've got stencils. So I really wanted to create some open layering stencils with all the addition of so many different texture paste and crackle paste now. I really wanted to have some stencils that had a lot of open area, and I like these. Although I name them, I give them names, I don't really focus on the names. I always focus on the numbers. I've talked about that, you know, in the past, that whenever I get a stencil, I just rub a little bit of black paint over that, because it has a little engraved number that you can't really see, but if you rub that in, you can see. So that's really how I reference the stencils personally, are just these numbers, because on the index, they're done numerically. So if you work from the Tim Holtz index, and it's a great way to pick out stamps and stencils. You just go into products, go into that brand, scroll through your stamps and be like, oh, CMS, whatever, and you can see the images. So that's what I use to see what's in my binders, and also to kind of look and see what stencil I want to work with, or you can just flip through all of these, all right? But I like the fact that this is kind of an open square, an open kind of focus, little bullseye, or some circles. Now these come in the regular size and the mini, but I wanted just to share about like how things look different when it comes to stencils, because sometimes when it comes to stencils, people just look at it and they don't really swatch it out. And I do believe that you need to swatch out your stencils the same way you do ink. And I don't mean you need to do like a traditional swatch. I just think you need to use it and not just get it and put it away. Because when you see it, it does change, to me, it changes what my eye sees. And so we'll talk about this first one, right? This square. So when you ink it, right, this is the difference in scale between the mini and the regular. So it's not just the fact that it's a smaller tag, it's actually a smaller scale, okay? But you can see here that it's got a great pattern. Now, if you ever want to get up close to these lines, right? So if you have a stencil that has some really thin lines in it, some line designs, and you want to get as close to that line as possible, you want to use some type of inking brush versus a foam, right? That could be a blending brush, that could be anything, but a brush is always going to get your ink closer to the edge of the stencil, the cut edge, right? So I really love this design inked. But when I went in with some texture paste, let me grab this one, maybe it's on the bottom, there you go. I don't know, but it like changed my eye from seeing squares to seeing plus signs, right? It's the same pattern, but I don't know what it was, but now like my eye, maybe it's because this one kind of broke off here just from swiping some paste through it. But now I look at this and now all my eye can go to are the plus signs, which I love that. I love that, you know, this pattern, you're either going to have blocks or plus signs or both. But yeah, a very cool design for this. That's what I'm saying. It's really interesting how the eye can be fooled between seeing color and seeing pattern, right? So I do love that. Then we've got this one, like this focus, and I like that. Again, the circles with the little lines through it. I think that's a great design. Didn't see much change in the texture other than, you know, I kind of see more of like the head of a screw or an aspirin. I don't know, maybe just that design. Maybe it's the contrast of the dark cardstock right now, but I do love not only the ink pattern, but also the texture pattern of that. Really good. And then, of course, the circles. Now, again, for ink, I notice more of the circles, those dots. But then when I did the texture, I noticed more of these like great pieces around it, and this had more of a tiled look. Again, same stencil, but it's very interesting, at least to me, how different a stencil can appear, whether you're using ink or stain versus some type of texture medium. So just play around with your stencils. Maybe some that you haven't used in a while, get them out and see what you think of it. But that's really why I did all really open designs now is for this release, because I wanted to have color, and obviously with all the new textures, I wanted that ability to play, to add, you know, whether it was crackle or grit or any of those. So I'm really happy with those 3 stencils, and of course the set of mini contains all 3 of those new designs. Then, of course, in the maker world, you know, there are makers that always say, I want, I need, and I hear them. And so one of the makers, Vicki Evans, crazy chick, she's like, I wish you could do big numbers. I'm like, yeah, me too, but it's just, it doesn't make any sense to do big numbers. Like on a stamp set, if we did big numbers, and I've done numbers before, but it's pretty much a full set on a sheet. But if you did big numbers, you're going to get like 2 on a set, and no one's going to spend like $200 or $300 on a stamp set for numbers. When it came to stencils, I couldn't really figure out the real estate to make numbers work, because if I'm doing numbers, I would want them to be individual, because maybe I want to do a 2/5 for Christmas, or I want to do a 4th for 4th of July, or a specific birthday. And so if I had several numbers on a stencil that were designed to be used individually, I'd be spending so much time masking, right? I've done other number stencils before, but they're more collage-y. So I reached out to Ted and the team. I work with Matt, who is a genius on that, Matt and Zach. And I'm like, okay, so what do you yield when you're cutting these out? Because obviously they're cut on laser. These are all laser cut from a big parent sheet. How many pieces do you get out of that? And so we did all the math. Not really good at that, but we did all the figuring out to figure out that, hey, if we just made the tag 1 size smaller, we can actually fit an entire set for pretty much equal to the price of a mini set, which was quite surprising, I think, with that. So these are the new elements. And you can see here that in the element set, it's incredible value, you get 12 stencils in the pack, right? So I started out with numbers. I did 2 different number fonts. One is a little chunky, one is a little tall, but both of these fonts are very grungy, if you will, meaning it's not like a clean font, right? It's got that great detail or texture. So this is like the chunky one. So when you go in and ink it, right, I'll bring in the sample here, you get that really cool imperfection, which is what I wanted, right? Again, this could be used in a background. This could be done ink blending. You can spray it. But that chunky one, they all have those little jaggedy bits, right, that are added in there to give that some personality, okay? This tall one, probably my favorite, because I love, this has just, to me, a way more industrial vibe to it. This is kind of cargo-y, this is a little bit more industrial, but look at that. Also has those imperfections, those little notches taken out, but a really cool, tall and skinny one. So you can see from scale, right? Tall, short, squattier. So if you're doing several numbers, right, up the side of something, this is really nice. If you're doing one big bold number, this one's really nice, okay? Each of these number sets, you can see, also has the NO and a plus sign. Cool to layer, right? So if you do two different ink colors, like number 2, number 4. We all have favorites. I mean, if you did the studio tour, people are like, what's with all the 5s? I like a 5. It's got a great shape. I like 3s. I like 7s. I pretty much like all numbers because I love the shape of numbers, but they're really cool to utilize. And you can do them just on a card, or even if you're just doing backgrounds, right? I went back and took some of my backgrounds that I've demoed in the past, right? We love this eroded metallic. Look how cool one of those element stencils is, done in crackle paste and then just thrown in with some crayon, right? So now I can still use this tag, I can still stamp on it, I can still collage, I can still layer ephemera, I can do all sorts of different things on it, but because it's just that bold element, it doesn't get lost. It becomes a statement, it becomes an element, right? That's what it is. It's an element, which is why I call them element stencils. Will they always be numbers? I'm not sure, right? They might become other elements. Maybe they become icons or shapes. Who knows where this idea goes? Who knows if this idea goes any further than these two sets, right? Maybe people don't like using them. Time will tell. But I did like the fact that I could have a set of stencils at a great price that has a single element to use. I don't have to worry about masking or any of that stuff, and I can layer them. So for example, like that 13. Like, look how cool. That's translucent grit paste with some crayon over a little cracked leather cardstock. Cool piece, right? Great page for a journal or a cover or anything. And it's just, I love that we have big, giant numbers because I like it, right? And again, playing around with different textures gives you a completely different look and feel to the element stencil. So with that, just, I know we're talking about Stampers Anonymous, but timing is everything. If we talk about like the tag size world, right? What size tags these are? These little guys is actually a number 5, and I've loved this size for years. And so a shout out to Ranger. These are the distress tags that I've used all the time. This is a number 8. You hear it all the time when we back in the day, 12 tags of Christmas, all of that. We did number 8 tags, and I use my distress tags all the time because this is mixed media heavy stock. So if you work with mixed media, that's what makes these so significant compared to just cheap manila tags. There is a difference in how this paper works. It's a completely different surface and I love it, but I've always wanted little tags. And I really, not gonna exaggerate when I say it's been years, 5 years more, to say I would really love a number 5 in this, because when it comes to Christmas time, when it comes to gift tags, a number 5 is the perfect size to tie onto something. And so Ranger just launched these. I think like they were supposed to be released maybe back in March, but I think they're shipping now from Ranger. This is the mixed media. This is number 5. So it's the same as this. It's just we kind of update the packaging now, getting rid of the brown, kind of going to all grayscale with everything. But now we have 8s and 5s in that heavy stock, and I love them. That's the size of this. So if you're kind of wondering scale size of those element stencils, it's a number 5 tag. And so I just love that, especially as we go into the season. I know so many people that are doing junk journals, and they are cute, Zoe. They are. So many people that do junk journals, like it's such a better size for an inclusion, right? Or a little fold-out page. Number 8s are great, but yeah, a 5 is really perfect. 2s to me are a little too small. That's like smaller than even a business card, so I don't necessarily bother with that, but I love that. Vicky, I need to order tags today. I know, exciting. I was like, you know, saying to Ranger, like, when are they coming? When are they coming? Because like I said, they were supposed to be released back in March and they just didn't make it. But I believe they're available now. If Ranger's in the house, I think they can. I agree, Jeanette, like all hearts. It's very cool. Right, Mario? 5 for the win. Number 5 tag. It's like the thing of 5s, I guess. Anyway, so that is the release, right? We've got the new stamps, the new stencils, the new minis, the new elements. You've kind of gone through. Now we're going to go in and talk about inspiration. I'll throw in a little demo if needed on some things. And yeah, just excited about this release, and even more so that it's in the hands of many, many people right now. And so for those of you that do like tags and have used tags, you'll know that there's definitely a difference in a number 5 than a number 8, from all your images and the scale of what you can use, and also to me the significance that they were mixed media. Because once you use a mixed media tag, like I could never go back to a manila tag. Besides that they're lighter in color, could never go back. All right, so I'm going to keep the stamps off to the side so I can talk about them as much as I can, and we'll go in and I'll do a little make. Okay, back to this. See, the problem with this is I don't know when I stopped, so I hate to kind of repeat, but maybe I can try my fancy editing skills. All right, so we'll start from the beginning. Floral elements. We're going to take the element and we're going to create our own arrangement. Very, very simple. So we can do some watercolor, all right? And the cool thing about creating a watercolor like this, yes, if you had the outline set is nice because you can just stamp an arrangement and off you go. But scale-wise, you're always left with this like big thing that would bleed off the page. So if you wanted it smaller on a card or a tag or something like that, then this is where this set really comes in handy, even if you're adding borders. And you'll see from the cards, all right? And we'll get to the cards. I'm not trying to hold those. So I'll take a stamp. Again, stamping with waterproof ink. We're going to work with archival. And I'm just going to ink up. I like to start with my main image. That's just me. And I'm sure everybody has probably their own way or technique of how they want to create something like this. But for me, I just like to start with what would be the focal point. In this case, it's going to be the flower. I'm stamping on the smooth side of distressed watercolor cardstock because that's going to give me the best detail, in my opinion. And I'm just going to stamp with purpose. I love a grid block for that reason. Again, once you get used to a grid block, to me, there's no going back because you can feel when you make contact. Where sometimes in acrylic block, you know, you're pressing so hard to make contact that you smash out the detail. It does take some getting used to, but really, once you get used to it, you're good to go. So, and Mario will be watching the demo to make sure, like, if you don't see my hands, and he'll know something's up. Okay. So I started with a flower. There you go. Beautiful little outline. Okay. Then I'm going to take an element here. So we're going to, let's just say we talk about the leaves. And the cool thing about this also is you would probably want to try this out on a piece of scrap paper, right? Get an idea before you then commit to watercolor paper. That's what I did. I just took a piece of copy paper, some scrap paper, and played around with some different looks that I wanted because here's the idea. So now I want some leaves coming out. Now this leaf, there's leaves and this stem. Now, if I was just going to stamp the leaves with the stem, I could stamp the entire thing. But because I just want leaves coming out of the flower, you could mask this, right? Some people would cut this and mask and do all that. But a really simple way for this particular type of art is just to ink up the part you want. So here I'm just inking the leaves, no ink on the stem. And now I can put those leaves right up against that outline and just stamp it, right? So now my leaves are just right there. I don't have this stick coming out because I didn't ink it. Really simple. The other thing, because this is all very sketchy and overlap, it doesn't matter where your lines overlap from one image to the next because it's sketchy, right? Super simple, all right? So next up, I'll just pick another element. So maybe we'll take these leaves, all right? Take this. Now, same thing. I wanted to have some leaves coming out, but maybe I don't want all these leaves to come out. So you just ink what you're going to use. That's the easiest thing. And if you want to work with your mini archivals, that's great with this as well. And then we'll just layer and stamp, right? So instead of stamping the entire thing that would come down past the flower, I only ink this upper part. Very easy to layer. And see how it comes together super, super fast and super simple to me, in my opinion. Then I'll take this smaller one. Again, flower. Because all of these I wanted to have some type of stem or stick just in case you were going to utilize it by itself. But I can add some little flowers there, ink that up, maybe fill in a little bit of the blanks down here, and zippity-doo, we're done, right? So very simple to take those pieces, stamp and create your own little arrangement, and off you go. And then you can use watercolor, you can use crayons, you can use re-inkers, you can use distress, you can use whatever you want. But the benefit of this set now just being outlines is the fact that you can go in and create whatever look you want. So for example, if you just wanted these little flowers, right, you just wanted these to come out of, you know, maybe you have a little can or a pot or anything, it is nice to have this look. But I feel that we needed to have the arrangements first in this line before we did the elements, because I think you can appreciate the versatility of that sketchy outline, right? Absolutely cool. That's what I love about that set. All right, we made it through the demo. Whoop, whoop. Okay, we did. So now we'll talk about the makes, and wait until you see these amazing makes with this set. All right, so the great thing about outlines is just their soft, subtle approach. This is a card, Stacy created this card, and look at the background, right? This is what I was saying about having these these images open now, because now you can create whatever pattern you want on a card. You're not restricted to having something just in the middle. You can start stamping on the outside. This is stamped in some distress, so it gives it a little bit more of a wet watercolory look. So when you color over it, it will bleed a little bit of that color, right? I love the addition of photo booth, little Sizzix die on there, just some vintage elements, some buttons. There's mica. These little pieces, this random, you'll see a lot of random collage from this, and so I'll probably pull in the set quite often, right? Because Eccentric just is such a cool set. Even if you're like, oh, it's, you know, too vintage, too grunge, you do realize she's used this all over this card. And this card is beautiful, shabby. There's a seal, right? That little postmark, there's the factory one right there. Finest in the world, that's on that set. The little library numbers, and I love how this number is done in red, also there. So it's a great way that you can use a lot of different elements in a collage and combine it with different stamps, okay? So beautiful, beautiful card, right? Paula created this card. I love just seeing just that soft approach of taking these flowers and then watercoloring them in all the way, kind of that no-line watercolor, right? Where you're stamping in that light color and then you just fill in with all of the other beautiful colors. And you can see, look at that, embossed in gold, right? Believe in yourself. Just really nice to have that noteworthy set. You'll see just how nice all of these images do come together. It was just a great way to pull a bunch of different art. But see these flowers, you don't have to create an arrangement, right? You don't have to connect everything. This makes a beautiful background, just taking those elements, stamping, and coloring those in. So absolutely wonderful way to see the images. And that's what I always love about the makers, is just that they just do their own thing, right? So Juliana created this one, again, taking that arrangement idea, taking those, and if you want to mask, you can, but if you look close, you can see how these overlap. That's okay, because the art just lends itself to that, where you don't have to always go in and think that, oh, I need to mask or do masking fluid. You don't. That's what's cool about the scribbly look. I like to see a little addition of a little ideology sticker there. I think that's the text from maybe the Toadstool set, but a beautiful way to, you can see so far 3 different cards from the same set, just how they're used, right? Whether they're trailing across for some grunge, whether it's a background, or whether you start doing arrangements. And they just keep getting better and better, right? So Jen created this card. Love the rainbow colors. Love the fact that just taking the flowers and just doing that trim straight across the card, and then do all of your watercolor right inside. So even if you're one where you're like, oh, you know, I don't know how to floral arrange, I don't know how to do the colors, I don't know how to do all that, but look at this. It's a beautiful way that you can take this and just create those elements, because overlapping them, it's almost like they're interlocked in there, right? A little sparkly, a little bling bling. Beautiful, love the colors, right? And of course, you know, I also like the absence of color, right? This whole grunge look. So Tiffany created this, a very simple card, a very subtle card, but just be fearless with the noteworthy. There's a little number in there from Eccentric, but if you take a look at the background, you see those leaves just stamped, right? So just giving it a little bit of an organic look off to the side with some grunge, because maybe you're like, I'm not a flower person, right? I don't want to use flowers, I don't want to do this. But those images really lend themselves to so many different looks when it comes to creating on a card. Even that scribbly outline that becomes part of a collage, right? Or that flower right here in the center. Just, it's a cool, cool look. I do love the idea of different looks. Nico created this card. Look at these flowers that he created. There's a little pocket, rusty tin right there. Again, I love that noteworthy, start somewhere. What a great card. You'll see the background, see all those images from Eccentric, right? See, perfection and stars. There's so many little interesting nuggets on this set, really. So many little nuggets that just, I like to call sets like this like fill in the blankers, right? Because you can put something down and you're like, oh, I need a little, and they just fill in the blanks. But I love how Nico created this, where there's some wire, and how he made the leaves out of little rusty wire. Isn't that clever? That goes with the pocket, and then those flowers, and these are just hand cut. There is no dye. We have scissors for that, so you could just go in and watercolor, cut those out, and layer it. So again, a great look. So cool to see, just one look after one look after one look. All right, Joy created this card. Love the beauty of this. Again, that wonderful soft kind of strip, a totally different palette than what Jen did, but I also love just that little bit of resist, right? Little crayon resist she used. Adding those soft colors, but that bold black outline. And just, I love, hello there. I mean, to me, this stamp set really, it looks like you just went in with a marker and wrote that. And now if my writing was always consistently that good, that would be great. But that's what I loved about this stamp set, where it really does have kind of that personal touch. But having those soft colors in the background, I love that just kind of torn, because this is masked off, right? So this isn't an extra paper laid on there. I think that's just really a beautiful look to this set. You can see how it's just building up, right? The background is like, whoa, right? Color after color after color. Kathy created this, right? Look at how well those stencils pair with this images, right? Because of that tiled look. And I know that Tammy B also did a tile thing on some pots recently that she shared on her blog and Instagram. But I love the geometric pattern of these stencils and how they play really well with the images in this release. But here you can see, I mean, this is a lot of stamping, a lot of cutting, a lot of layering, Kathy, but I love it. Love those images that are embossed in black. That's what really makes them stand out, because you'll notice in these cards how different they are, right? Whether you're stamping in a distress ink, whether you're stamping just in archival, or if you're doing embossing, that really does control, I would say, the boldness of the outline element of this particular set, right? But look at those patterns. Love the texture in there, little grit, and then hope is never lost. Again, you're going to see those noteworthies just, they'll pop in everywhere, right? Tifa did this, and Tifa just, this is just such a beautiful, beautiful envelope, right? Again, take a look at the texture with the crackle paste of those stencils and the color. For amusement only, that stamp from Eccentric, and you've got the flowers, but take a look at this beautiful envelope, that wonderful frame, right? The paper doll portraits. I love the little flower that you put in her hair. So wonderful. That is from the stamp set, right? The outlines, because as I mentioned, you know, in this particular stamp, there's all different, there's a leaf somewhere. There's all different sizes of flowers. So beautiful. And just how she was able to stamp and layer those. Again, the embossing really outlines those designs. I love the trailing leaves, and then just around one of the frames. And you can see in the background, right, on the acetate, just stamped and embossed with the Eccentric, because that just adds just some element, whether it's numbers or stars or typography, just a beautiful use of the stamps. And then, as always, I'm not going to lie, whenever I get a card, and I've said this before in previous lives, I get a card from Alberto and I just think, did he mean to send this to me? Like, are these even my stamps? And I swear I have to look and stare to try to understand how this could possibly be the same stamp set, right? But having these outlines, you can see it's there. See the stamp? It is really there. So he used the stamp as an outline, but his coloring skills are just off the charts to see how he can go in and use, I mean, really, if you look close, the image is there, right? You could argue like, oh, it's not there. It is there. But just his use of colors and how he can blend, it transforms really a very scribbly, chaotic image into something that looks to me completely smooth and different. And yes, he does a lot of freehand work, you know, where he's creating these little wispy stems, but you can definitely recognize image to image from, you know, the little buds. Okay, there they are here. It's just really, it's just amazing to see the skills of every single maker and what they can do. Because the most important thing to me with any of the makers that I'm lucky enough to work with is that they stay true to their style. It's about their style. It's about taking that image and doing what they would do to it. So seeing his coloring, and then of course adding those noteworthy stamps, the You Are Enough and Shine Brightly, I just think you'll see that regardless of the style that you've created your card in, how that noteworthy font is just, it's classic. It really, really is. I love that. Keisha created this absolutely beautiful card. I love seeing that white embossing powder as a resist, and then just using ink or just working on a colored cardstock and adding that for contrast. And I also love the idea of just using many of those statements, right? Because it doesn't just have to be one. It could be whatever you need to say to whoever you're making this card for. But Keisha, I just think it's really great. I love the contrast of that blue and white. And I think that these black strips really just pop. Wow, so, so good. So good, just because really every single thing is having a different look and a different feel to this. Zoe in Italy created this card. Take a look at just the beauty of taking an inked background, right? And you'll see that this little accent out here, yes, anyone? Bubbles, yep, that's the bubble stamp. Where if you're creating an inky background, maybe it's even watercolor, you can still stamp it in a similar color using bubbles, and it's going to give your background that cool kind of splotchy look that I love, that a lot of times will flick water or do anything. That's where this stamp is going to come into play, and you'll see at the end the demo. It's a really versatile stamp for texture. Sometimes people see it as a background, they're like, no, like you are missing out to me on one of the best stamps out there. And I don't say that often, but this one just is a changer. So here you can see the gold embossing, right? That's the other nice thing about using embossing powder. When you look at a card, you can see the outline because it's dark enough, but man, when the light hits it, it just has a whole other bling to it. So beautiful colors and beautiful use of inks and embossing on that card, even if your palette remains, very, very neutral. But then when we talk about neutral palette, we're definitely not talking about Anita, because Anita is not afraid of color and contrast. And I love, when she has an idea, I love that she always makes some multiples. So thanks, Anita, for that, because it is cool to say, hey, I have this idea for a card or a layout. And scrapbookers have been doing that for years, right? Where they have that scrap layout and you just mimic that layout. No different than in the card world. If you have a layout of a design of using images, there's no reason why you can't repeat that, even if you switch out, in this case, the pattern, like the stencil. You can see how the patterns are different. Or you change out the sentiment, but the idea, the layout, is the same, right? So here, just working on black cardstock, what a wonderful look, right? It always reminds me, whenever I see color popped on a black background, it's like a velvet painting of Elvis. It's just really cool just to see that pop. And again, embossed in metallic, that's going to give it that extra shine. Some little droplets right there, but very cool. And I like the use of a stencil as just kind of that masked off focal point, right, where you can create that. You don't have to stencil the entire background, but you certainly can. And again, do you see pluses or squares? See, now I just see pluses because I said it. But beautiful, right? Beautiful cards. It's so amazing to see, what is done. These cards Tammy created, and this is the technique that I believe she also shared on the pots, which is using the stencils and working with the translucent crackle. I love that, just that embossed crackle. Beautiful. This might be translucent, this might be opaque. It's hard to tell when you're using glaze on it, but I love seeing that crackled stencil using the Distress embossing glaze as your color because it looks like shattered ceramic. But look at these arrangements. Again, beautiful, embossed in white, stamped and layered, probably ironed out, it's going to be my guess, because it's smoothie, right? And I know Tammy loves that, like faux batik where you iron out, but so much cutting. Every time I look at these cards, I'm like, wow, amazing. That much cutting, not happening in my world. I mean, I don't mind. I can cut a flower, like that's fine. I'll cut a few, but that's a whole nother level of fussy cutting. But some people, it's their jam, right? It's just therapy to go in and cut those out. And there won't be dies, not for me, there won't be dies that coordinate with stamps, again, because it's just two different brands and it's too complicated. But see those cutting skills in action, amazing. And I've heard from a lot of makers where they're like, hey, I just do it kind of, systematically. I'll stamp and emboss a bunch of stuff, and then sometime I'll just spend, a couple hours cutting in front of the TV. So yeah, whatever works. But beautiful to see two different arrangements, two different color palettes, but again, same idea, right? Same concept where you're doing that. And I think having that batik and creating that where you're smoothing that out. I mean, I've loved that trick since Carol Duvall days. Remember that, Mario? Doing that faux batik? Wow. Iron it out. I still have my craft iron from that. That's got, I don't even, yeah, that's got to be like, who knows? Maybe that's from the 90s. Gosh. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful cards. And then we'll wrap up this set. It's a card that Emma created. Again, beautiful. You can take it to whatever level, whatever size, whatever scale, and again, pair it with different things, right? Whether it's a stenciled background, I love, you can see, again, there's the pluses, plus in box, right? Creating that arrangement with the outlines, using your favorite Sizzix, right? If you've got your embossing folders or if you've got your alphanumerics, you can pair it with that. It is great when you work stamps with stamps, but it's also important to remember that as a maker, right, we have all these things to work with together, right? So if you wanted something that, you don't have a stamp for that, or you don't have a stencil for that, and you have a die, mixing the best of all those worlds, that is magic. And of course, Ranger, all the inks and mediums, that's the glue that keeps everything together, literally. But all that stitching detail around there, again, finest in the world, those little numbers, that's from Eccentric. But what a beautiful card, right? I mean, all these cards are beautiful. And you look at this from cards to envelopes, but so many different looks and aesthetics from a stamp set.
Gorgeous.
A stamp set, right?
That's beautiful.
Unbelievable. So thanks, makers. Beautiful cards for, that's a stamp set. That's only one. It's a good thing we only have 5, right? Because there's a lot of inspiration. You'll see that, you know, I think when it comes to flowers and noteworthy text, that's clearly a favorite, but these just unbelievable. And as always, the makers will be sharing these on social media today. They'll be posting those. Not all of them do tutorials. Many of them do tutorials over the coming weeks or months, so you want to be sure to follow the makers. And all of these cards that we show in live are always featured on timholtz.com. There'll be a blog post later today to talk about this release. And if there is a link, there will be a clickable link that will take you to whether they have a tutorial or Instagram post relating to that. So there is a way that you can go back and see those images, you know, obviously following the live. All right. So these, we'll just talk about these because these were just a couple of makes that really stood out to me, and just how the makers used stamps in a completely unique way. Anita and Jeanette created with a bunch of different stamps. So first we'll talk about this mixed media project that Jeanette made, just done out of cardboard, right? Jeanette just loves to do mixed media, and she has just such an amazing eye for texture and color and how things go together. I mean, each one of these panels can just be by itself, right? So incredible. But if you look close at the work, you'll start to kind of dial into the elements of that. Sure, there's a lot of textures and colors and paints, and there's even some ideology with stickers and flashcards, but here you can see, again, the floral elements there. Or up here, you can see, you know, the dictionary text from the Botanical Collage, or you can see some numbers from Eccentric. So 3 different stamp sets just used on that panel. Or when you start adding, you know, the noteworthy sentiments, or just the number 5, again with texture. And that's the thing that's important to remember about stamps, right? Stamps are tools. So whether you're making cards, whether you're doing scrapbooks, whether you're doing journals, junk journals, or even mixed media pieces, the imagery can be used to your advantage if you use it the way you would authentically use it, right? So here, just having some trims in the back, there is an ideology. I love those. I love the paper doll portraits. But again, cutting those sentiments out. I love just even the change of cardstock and paper, how it's done. And then those additions of images, right? Where maybe the image is stamped as the background. Maybe it's stamped and cut in the foreground. The whole idea of mixed media or collage is layers, right? Things need to be in the background, things need to be in the midground, foreground, and obviously dimensionalized. And then you've got this panel. Look at all that cool texture, right? With those stencils. Love the whole look of just all of that texture and color. And again, some little ideology snippets, whether you've got ephemera, some threads, a little photo booth, and then Be You, the World Will Adjust. What a fitting photo for that too. It's so silly. And Be Fearless. So how cool to see stamps used in it just in a different way, right? That's what it's about. So again, if you're doing, and I know so many people are doing a lot of different things now as makers. That's great that we've gone beyond the card to do so many different things. This one Anita created, and I love this, and she did send me a note, so I I understand this is really the design, and she has an entire story and theory about it. But I also think it's equally beautiful, like this, Anita. But this is a bag, like a linen bag or a canvas bag, but this was a whole waterfall of words, if you will. So these are all the noteworthy, just stamped on here as a waterfall. And down here, this is the bubble stamp, just kind of like waterfall into a rainbow of bubbles, right? And so you see all the way around that whole idea of all of these different quotes cascading down into this splash or rainbow bubbles. I also think this is fabulous though, really, because to me, just even having it vertical is cool because, well, probably because I want to read everything, but I still love all of these little color blobs here, because now to me, it's more like, I don't know, baubles or just colorful dots and circles, but a very cool way to use stamps on here, and just, yeah, a great way that you can, yeah, I love the little filler. I'm not going to take, Anita's great about sharing instructions on how she does stuff, but a clever way, right? to use stamps. So many different ideas, and that's what lives are all about, really is. Lives are all about just having ideas of what you want to do and how you want to take stamps or whatever that is to another level, whether it's stamps, dyes, ideology. I think that's the magic of the makers for live, right? The magic of the makers. All right. Good? Good. So far, so good? Yeah, good. You're not frozen. Okay. Yay. Then I'll keep talking. As long as I'm not frozen, I'm going to keep talking. Let's go into this. So I wanted to break up this set. So this one we're going to talk about, and I mentioned this at the beginning. This is Botanic Collage. And the Botanic Collage, because it has a lot of elements, you'll see in these makes, you know, it looks totally different. As I was separating these, I'm like, well, wait a minute, these are all from the same stamp set. But like some makers just really did just the butterflies, some did one flower, some did another flower, and some did a whole collage. So it's really interesting because honestly, there's 2 buckets of makes from this one set. That's what I said. You can always tell, you know, the favorites. You can always tell the favorites of the makers when how many things are made. So this one we'll get in. We're going to talk about the ones that I found that had more butterflies. They have other elements, but really more butterflies. So this card, Joy created. I love that stenciled background. Beautiful blend. Joy, love the background. And I love the idea of stamping the collage, then stamping it again, and cutting out that piece to isolate it, right? So you can see under there, the butterfly, that's part of the collage. That's what's really nice about collage stamps. Sometimes people, you know, aren't comfortable with layout and scale and how they do stuff. So it is nice that you can stamp it again and just die cut that. I'm not die cut, hand cut that. See, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. And layer it right over the top. And then we have that Be Authentic, right? It's because the cutting is so detailed. I thought it was, right? That's it. These cards Kath created. Love the palette, you know that. I love a good grunge. But here, using the stencils, right? Little crackle in there, wonderful. Love to see the embossing glaze on those. That's what gives it the shine, right? Having some of that text. But I also like the idea where Kath just used that and then just stamp just that portion of it again, right? So you don't have to stamp them parallel. You can just angle it just to create a whole different perspective. And then the other butterfly, because there's 2 different ones in this set, just create another card. Again, if you have all of your stuff out, and let's just take both of the cards if they were, let's say like that, do your inking, do your texture, do, you know, your stamping, but you can create one card that's going to be horizontal and one that's vertical. And I also like the idea, of course, of using your stencils and then just adding a little bit of color into some elements, right? Little inking, and there you go. Noteworthy. Collect Beautiful Moments, limited edition. Great cards, right? So good. See, it's already great to see just the shift, right? I think if you guys have watched lives enough, like I can pretty much put out a card and you're like, I know the maker, right? You'll guess. Anyone? This is Jen. Rainbow, a lot of color. And again, I love the use of that. So here, this background, this is an older stamp set, which I love. This is, I think it was Tiny Text. It has a lot of different types of sentiments, makes for a great background. But I really like how it sets the stage for using the stencil, right? Whether you're going to use resist spray, whether you're going to use embossing and layer this over the top, or whether you're going to do painting with powders, right? So you can mimic that inked layer underneath, and then just using those elements in black because they still have some little text going through them, right? Some little collage bits that you can stamp. Look at that. Ooh, that's some serious action right there. And then that Noteworthy. But very cool to see how these are used because obviously it is a collage stamp, right? It's a collage stamp where you can just stamp that and you have that design. But knowing that you can go in and kind of extract elements, well, that's what makes stamps to me even more versatile. Juliana created this one. Again, love the idea of just that haphazard play of texture with those stencils. Now you can see why I wanted to do all of those open stencils. They just play really well. They already played well with the floral outlines, and now they do with Botanic Collage because it really doesn't take away from these pieces. But if you look in here, you can see that the background image, that is one of the Botanic Collage, right? The flower, but it's just stamped in an ink color, right? Like a gray or a neutral tone. It's not stamped in black, so it is the background. And then you have those images that are stamped in black and cut and layered into the foreground, right? So you've got this collage, and then those layered pieces. And yeah, I mean, you can see pretty much every maker has done so much cutting just with scissors. That's what they're for, right? Just to cut things out We learned that in school, just cutting things out. And yeah, while you probably don't want to cut out hundreds of hundreds, well, you can still cut out the ones that matter when you're layering. Love the idea of also kind of making these. I like to embrace my wonkiness sometimes, especially with words like this. So very cool. And look at this one. I mean, you talk about color. So Nico created this one. Look at this beautiful slimline. I love the colors in the background, right? Just that dreamy grunge. And I think it's just the fact of seeing that grunge on black. Whoa, right? It really just stands out. But I also love, there's so many ideas about this. Obviously the butterflies layered, but you can see just the random elements from Eccentric, the numbers, the 5. These are all cut out. The little antenna, this is just that rusty wire, right? He used some rusty wire with this floral. I think what a great addition to that. But also I love these little strips of cardstock where he took Collect Beautiful Moments, obviously stamped it and embossed it in white, and then just cut the strips apart and stitched it over the background, right? So when he stitched the background, he just attached those pieces, and I love that they're not glued down. I think that's really what it was, is the fact that because it's not glued down, it really just kind of adds almost like a curvature to this card. Even though the card is flat, when you look at it, I think just because this stands out and is casting a drop shadow, it just makes everything look just more dimensional. So, right? But beautiful use. So here, this is really just about using these butterfly elements and not so much, you know, incorporating the text that goes with them. That's what's great about Maker. You know, you do the element that you want to create. Yuko created this card. Love the grungy texture, right, of all of those embossing, that glaze. I think just having that torn out hole in there, so cool. There's the text. And then there, again, the butterfly, having those separate. But see, the whole idea of a collage, right? You can certainly use the text as your collage, and then you can use an element, and then be you, the world will adjust, just in some metallic and scratched off, and again, a little eccentric. But see, having it on metallic, it also adds that little, I don't know, that little flair, that little, I don't know, that little addition. All right. Kathy created this card. Beautiful, beautiful card. At first I thought it was a book because it's pretty thick. I'm like, oh, did she make a mini book? It's like, but it's a card, and you're going to see why in a second. But first, we have to look at every little element of this card. First, the background, bubbles, right? Bubbles in black. What a great background texture this has. You'll see that she's got the butterflies on there. You're going to see some elements. You're going to see a little seal that's stamped, right? A little ticket, little ideology, little tag. This is just kind of some mummy cloth that's been separated. Mummy cloth comes out Halloween, every Halloween for ideology. It's great to layer and then just pull it apart because it frays so beautifully. You'll see the use of some stencil back there, some text, there's some crackle. Just, I mean, just the outside alone, amazing. Are you kidding me? Like, what is that trickery right there? See, like pop-up, like paper mechanics. And I'm sure many people are like, oh, come on, Tim, like I've seen pop-up cards, but see stuff like that little twist and pop. So cool. Seriously, right? That's why I was like, it's a book. And then it was like, whoa.
Watching over here, like watching it twist.
Yeah. So here you can see the inside. Look at the use of bubbles and those element numbers. Remember I said like having just giant numbers sometimes will really work with your background. Because you think, would I ever need big numbers? Well, it adds a cool element. But then you can look at how she used all 4 of those stamps in this set as part of the card, right? So you have that challenge of like, could you use all 4 of these on one card? I would be thinking, well, no, not really. And then there's this, which absolutely beautiful. So here, this is probably one of the stack shapes, right? I did a line of dies with Sizzix that are like different postage stamp sizes. But I think these backgrounds are so cool how they're just stamped. They're splattered with the black, which gives it even more of a grungy look that goes with the black bubbles that are in the background. Because this bubble, this was inspired, like I'm sure you've seen for years, where you would put, you know, acrylic paint in with dish soap and you would blow into it with a straw and you would build up these bubbles and you would lay your paper in it. If you haven't, it's been around for forever. It's cool, it's messy, it's unpredictable. And that was the inspiration for this stamp. When I saw this design, I knew I had to license it because it's amazing. It's so cool. But yeah, what a wonderful card. So much work. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And then we will show Alberto's. He had a lot, so I just needed to like give some room. Again, the colors, right? Just seeing, taking a stamp, and you have me here, and then you lose me here, where I'm like, how is that the same with those little hand-drawn sparkles? But you can see that when you see his cards, they are distinctly him, and that's the power of a maker, right? You can distinctly look at features that the designer or maker is comfortable. So you can see splatters in the background, right? You see the colors, you see the sparkles, beautiful. And all of these are cut and layered on the top each time, but so beautiful, right? Look at that. Great little note cards, great little pop of color. And I love just seeing those on the splatters in the back, right? Good element. So a whole different look and feel, but just, again, we haven't even gone into the flower part of the stamp set, right? Other than Kathy's, which kind of had everything, but you can see here that it has a lot of potential for using the images in a collage in different ways, right? You with me? So far, so good. We're going to move on to the flowers. All right.
Here, I'll take those. Thank you.
Thank you. It's like one handful after the next. Thanks, Mario.
You're welcome.
All right. Continuing with this set, take a look at this card that Keisha did. I like, this has like a newsprint thing, right? I love the idea of just seeing this stamped as a background, you know, just kind of like collaging with newsprint. I think it's really cool. If you take a look, I'm going to see if the light's going to cooperate. Can you see that this little white shine? This is bubbles, right? So it's that bubbles background, just stamped it in embossed white, and it gives this card, I don't know if the camera's picking up, but it does give it like such a cool texture, almost like there's a little lace in there. And then of course, the die, I love that, the bold text from Sizzix, and then Handle with Care from Eccentric, just stamped and cut out a different color. What a charming card, right? Oh, Keisha, so good. So good. Really, all the cards are just amazing, 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 and I say that. Zoe in Italy created this, again, like the grays and blues, like her last card, just that very neutral tone, but I love just that pop of color, right? Where we've got that collage element. It's got a little bit of collage paper back there. Then we've got that little texture that shines through, right? Similar to our other card. We've got the stitching, but I love just that other element added to the top of this and pop. So very cool way to incorporate the collage by just adding that little touch of color over the top. And then color, Kath created this. Love the sprays through the stencil. To me, that created like the foundation of this card, right? Because that's your color right there. That's it. So your color is coming from the stencil. That's really what it is. All your other elements that maybe you don't want to go in and color or add those things, none of that matters, because you can stamp all of your other elements in black and you still have this great colorful card. So you can see the Botanic collage here that Kath did, and then all of these pieces on the side, this is all from the Eccentric set, right? The numbers, the postmaster content, right? The little, the cancellation, the library, I think it's really cool. And then Just One Life, which of course that's one of my favorite sayings. Then we have a couple of shabby cards, two different makers, but again, very, very different aesthetics to how they use this. So Tiffany created this, again, kind of, you saw her last card, had that, you know, very mixed media on white approach. This has a similar aesthetic to it, but different, because this is about the image itself. Image that has that wonderful look of just that watercolor wash. Even something with this much text in there, you wouldn't think, oh, I'm not going to watercolor that, but you can, because that's what makes it so amazing to add color. And then splattering this over the top, right? So it just gives it a wash of color. I'm not sure. This kind of looks alcohol inkish to me. I would guess that this is alcohol ink. That's just me. I'm not sure. It looks like it though, because it's on that coated paper. But I love, again, that little touch of metallic. Really cool on there of You Do You, and then over an embossed background. So beautiful card, Tiffany. And I think she was doing a video on that, which would be cool. I'm going to check that out. Then Stacy created this. So again, this is an idea, although it's not a number 5 tag. It's a great idea of, oh, it is alcohol ink. Thanks, Tiffany. It's beautiful. It's really cool. I love the subtlety of that. But the splatters is so cool. So here, this is just an idea, and while Stacy didn't use that, it does give an idea of like what you can do with a number 5, right? That size. So if you're a card maker, it's great to be able to stamp an element in that number 5 tag and sew it on. Here it was just a piece of cardstock, but you could do that. So if you're always wondering how do you use, like what do you do with tags? Well, tags could be a layer on a card if you want. So here this is a stencil monoprint where you actually ink the stencil, spray it, and stamp with the stencil. So now you're actually getting the lines, the pattern lines of the stencil versus the inside, a great technique. And then I love just that stamping and kind of messy watercolor. If you stamp with distress and watercolor with distress, when you watercolor, it's going to wet the ink that you stamp with, right? Stacy uses that to her advantage because it adds a little bit of grunge to the watercolor. If you didn't want that, you would stamp, of course, in archival if you wanted that to be permanent. But don't ever be afraid to just stamp in your distress inks and also watercolor in your distress inks, knowing that it's going to re-wet some of that. But hey, if it's brown, ooh, that's my jam right there. But again, just adding some sewing, some buttons, a little curling of the paper. You can see just a great shabby aesthetic to the cards. This card Barbara created. I love the use of stencils in different ways on this one, right? So we talked about printing, right, where you're inking and printing. So that's where you're getting the line pattern of this stencil. So this was printed. This is where paste was applied through a stencil. So if you haven't ever printed with a stencil, check it out. I've done, there's several videos out there, but it's usually called like stencil monoprint, where you ink the stencil, spray it with water, and actually, well, stamp with your stencil. But it creates a very cool pattern, because especially when you use it in conjunction with putting a texture through it, it's a great way that your eye's like, what? How is that happening? It's good. So here, love the white embossed background, and of course, that flower. Look at the, I'm good with cutting until you get me on an island, right? That little inside, that involves usually a blade, and I'm out. Yeah, but very cool. Love that little quote chip right there. Beautiful card. Again, see, so many different colors so far. Zoe created this one. Zoe, I love this. And I'm sure Zoe's going to do a blog tutorial about it, but it's really impressive. She sent some photos to Paula as to how this was done. A lot of layers, obviously layers of brown and goodness and stitching. A little bit of stamping on there from Eccentric to add the elements. Or you can, of course, use, you know, ephemera. If you don't have the stamp and you want to use ephemera, there's a lot of inspiration from that, or the remnant rubs, as I mentioned. But this is very clever as far as how this was colored, because this is, you can see the reflection. This is a large mica tile. Can you kind of see that little crack right there, that little fragment? This is one big mica piece. If you don't have mica, you could use transparency, but mica, I just love that the fact that it is a mineral. It gives you those little, I don't know, the camera's not going to pick it up, but there's these imperfections, right? These little cracks and this little staining. That's all from the mica. But how this is done as far as like the image, so I'll just tell you, because I don't want to give away the trickery of this, but I will tell you that the mica tile is not colored in any way. Okay? And I'm just going to leave it at that, because I'm sure she'll share that. But absolutely amazing to see the collage, and I love that color, that pop. Really beautiful card. And again, just the layers. So you could pick an element and do your style. That's what this live is all about, to remind you of, like, you can see a stamp set, and sometimes just seeing a stamp set and seeing it in one way, you're like, because you're only seeing it, well, essentially, you know, black and gray. But when you see it come to life with different styles and aesthetics, that's where I think the makers always shine and always impress me, because I say to them every time, like, do you. Stay true to your style, because that's what's going to give, I think, the whole collection just authenticity. So Kuber created this card. Love that inky background. She always does some great ink techniques. You can do some stenciling. You can do printing. You can do all sorts of little smear of some crackle, right? That translucent crackle paint gives you that really fine, great crackle, and then that image stamped in black. Again, when you see these, look at how the image is being used, right? Stamped as a watercolor-ish technique, right? Or watercolored in, or stamped over, like Kath, stamped over a background if you're not into coloring, right? Or you use it as a background pattern to stamp. Tons and tons of ideas. That's what it's all about. Cassie created this card. Love seeing that bubble stamp in the background, right? Again, great texture. You'll see the stamped image there. If you don't know what to do with a collage stamp, right? Because sometimes people, you know, because a collage stamp is designed to not necessarily have a straight edge, it just bleeds off. Some people, it freaks their freak, right? They want it to be a little bit more controlled, if you will. Well, there's nothing wrong with taking a collage stamp, stamping it, and then cutting it out, right? If you cut it out, you frame it and you mat it, now it's going to have boundaries. It's going to have that framed area. So layering it on cardstock is great for that. Here's a little ideology quote seal with a little crayon in there. I love that. For I am the dreamer, life is the dream. I do love that. Has a little bit of a Wonka vibe to me, but I like that quote. And then again, just seeing those colors, see, just laying it down. And this is not planned. That's the thing. Like, you would think that it's like there's got to be some sort of, you know, little maker get together of like, what colors are you using? Oh, I'll use this. Okay, I'll use this. They don't, not that I know of. And then, you know, it shows up and we have magic. Susie created this etc. tag. I love, again, when it comes to stamps, it could be a card, it could be a tag, it could be a journal. I love the etc. tag. I love seeing that image. This is colored with glaze, right? Look at the glaze on there. Oh, so beautiful with some ink as well. That adds just that little splash. I love seeing a little burlap behind there, right? Those little layers. Having that stamped again where it's torn really makes it look like it's onto newsprint. It's just the little details, right? Like even this, these little elements from Eccentric, just stamped and cut out and made your own tags, right? Adding some little string to it, right? Where you're just gluing it together. So you don't have to punch a hole. You can stamp two different things and glue them back to back. Put on there with a little ideology mini clip. It's just a little mini paper clip, but what a great little addition for not only a tag, but even junk journal, anything like that. So cool. Some extra little stamping, a little bit of that stencil print, and then even the back, right? See? That surprise, those elements, those surprise elements of like, boom, a big number. And then you wonder, like, does it have significance? Well, maybe it's the year, right? 2022. Maybe it's just your mark. Maybe it's your favorite number. That's the thing that I love about numbers, because it does make people curious about it. I know, again, when we do the tour, they're like, what's with the 5? I just like it. But sometimes there's a deeper connection to numbers for people. And again, there is that bubble stamp as the background. Pretty amazing that one stamp can create so much texture. That's what I think. That's what I think is just amazing about that stamp. Really cool. Kath created this. Again, love the colors. It's always really surprising of seeing these little pops of color that she's added to the stencil. She did that on her other card, and I think it's so cool to see just that little bit of printing color that goes inside there, right? This looks like crackling campfire. It's just that really rich. I'm not sure if it is, but it looks like that to me. And then, of course, the color of glaze. Remember, when it comes to embossing, yes, there's black, and there's white, and there's metallic, and there's all of those. But the cool thing about using embossing glaze is you really get those unique colors in the world of distress, especially if you're doing a lot of backgrounds, right? That you can use all sorts of different colors to that. Mix your ink and oxide in your background so you have some depth of color. You've got that softer bit, and then you have a little shine on there. Cool, right? Beautiful, beautiful. And then we have a layered envelope from Tifa. Again, I love the collage aspect. And I will say that Tifa, the envelopes, it's like, wow, there's so much on a surface to really take in. It's beautiful. If you look at the background, right, it has almost like this, I don't know, this cool webbing look with the bubbles because they're just stamped repeatedly around it. So that's what's giving the background texture. So many different layers of incorporating ideology ephemera, using paste through a stencil, adding some elements, stamping on some elements, using that collage, and then just cutting that out. So, you know, again, I mentioned on MK's card where just going in and taking that and cutting it out to give it a frame. But here, Latifa's like, great, I'm just going to outline that. It gives it a whole different vibe, right? A different layer, a different flow to a collage, mixed media, right? It is all about just those layers and putting those together. And then even on the back, layered. Right? Because I was like, wow, in the front, and then I turned over and like, there it is. You can see the bubbles, the color, again, ideology. This is where all the brands you've seen in these cards, they come together in such harmony, right? You see Ranger, you see Sizzix, you see Stampers, and then you see ideology thrown in. And I love the whole look of all of this. It's very cool. And just the addition, really, of adding some texture to things, that's a surprise right there. So again, like another beautiful shot. And this is the other half. Remember, we just went through all of the butterflies. These are really more the flower side of a stamp set. So when you look at this, you're like, I don't really know, it looks like newspaper. And then you see this. I hope that, if anything, this is kind of changing your mind a little bit of what you can see from possibilities of an image, right? So incredible. So cool every time. Just amazing. Amazing, amazing. All right. Now let's go in. We're going to keep going. And we're going to talk about a couple of things. I still have a couple of sets to talk about and some demos, but I'm going to go in and talk about just some numbers. Because on the back of seeing that collage, when I talked about like mixed media, right? Or just using elements to your thing. Sometimes I think that we, get a stamp set or get a stencil and feel the need to use every element of it. I think what you need to remember is that different projects are going to inspire different uses. And to me, these two makes really show just that use when it comes to the element stencils, right? Just using the numbers or texture. So this is an etc. tag that Yuko created. I love just the juxtaposition of those numbers being upside down and reverse. I think that's just really cool to have that just as a limited edition. It's just a very clever use of imagery, very grungy, right? The background is all, I'll say the plus stencil, but it's really just that box. But all I see, we'll see over here now, I see squares, here pluses, same stencil. But again, you can see that using those elements just on their own is perfectly perfect, right? And then you see this card that Emma created with just the numbers and that plus sign right there. Using it on those panels, right, with oxide. But then you've got the hardware heads. You've got a little bit of grit paste rust around there to make this look so industrial, right? And she's got transportation company, handled with care. That's going to be from the Eccentric. But just using those as your focal point, right? This is using the translucent paste, the distress. I love that. That's one of the new pastes. I love having that because, again, you can go right through a stencil. It creates an amazing resist. It also has that cool sheen to it. But that is the significance of also just using a stencil as your piece, as your inspiration for whatever it is you're doing. So I was really, really happy to see, some makes that just were like, you know what? I know there's all those other stamps and stuff, but I'm just going to focus on using the stencils. That's great. So good. I know I love the rusty crusty industrial makes too. Two totally different makers, very different style. And that's the magic of a maker, right? Okay. So as I get into my other sets, I will start gushing about these a little bit more. So I apologize in advance because listen, I can have my faves if I want. I can have my favorites too. And I really like pretty much most of these as new favorites, right? I always say that my favorite is the thing I'm currently using, but here we go. So it is. It's like if I'm using it, it's my favorite. If I'm using something else in 5 minutes, that's my favorite. So Eccentric, I'll talk about this time and time again because, I don't see many more of this type of stamp in the future because it is a huge expense to Stampers Anonymous because, I say to Ted, can we do this? But, I don't want to charge, 50, 60 bucks, even though I'm sure that's, he paid a significant amount for a die and all of the pressure used to create the set. But I'm happy that we do have sets. So I'm really happy that he is open to having occasionally something like this. It's probably going to be the most. But then you see a make like this and it just is like, you see, Ted, you see why we need all of those things in here? Zoe created this. This is an etc. tag. And this just shows just what you can do with elements, right? It could be a background, it could be a filler, or it could be your playground, right? It could be your playground of using this. So this is that bullseye set from, I don't know the name of it, but I know Zoe's here and she'll say it. But this is from one of the previous releases. But I love just the playfulness of all of these pieces from Eccentric, stamped, cut, layered, different colors, and a lot of playful things. This little guy right here, this little banner, this is from Bunny Games, right? The Sizzix die that we did with the little pennants. But not only did she go in and created the pennants, but then we have like the little stars, right? So that little star stamp, and then using a circle punch and layering those. Or that little circle right in the middle. That's on this set somewhere. There it is. It's like find the circle. See right there? That little dial circle right there, right? The pointy finger. Well, we've talked about that again and again, like the pointy finger for the win. But then you see the ticket. You see adding some texture in there. There's the numbers. There's so many elements that you could call out on here and just how they're layered, right? Even if it's tucked behind it, it's there, right? So you see that little handmade seal, you saw that on a lot of makes, right? That little handmade. So cool to see that tucked in. There's a great piece from Ideology, right? The adornment arrows or some Ideology stars, because you can have your layers or some hardware heads for skill and amusement only, right? One of my favorites. This has been layers, this has been stamps, it's a rub. I love that. It's so good. And then just return and forwarding postage guaranteed. So sometimes people look at a set and they're like, why? Like, I don't get it. I'm like, but what's to get except everything? Because you can use whatever parts and piece. And that's why when I did this as a rub-on, it was a dream to say, it makes for great rubs, but wouldn't this be a great stamp set? Never did I dream it would happen, to be honest. And I even said when I sent it to Ted, I'm like, look, I really want you to do it, but if you can't do it, I'm okay with that. I completely understand that I'm asking for pretty much the impossible, because having it all in one set, I think gives the maker this kind of freedom, right? To just go in and just fill in the blanks. You just go and go. And you can layer, you can do all of your cutting out and doing all of that. If you don't want to do your cutting out, like, I love this, right? I love this card. MK did this. It's very, very cool to see these images also layered in the background, stamped, right? Also adding some little bits of color, because you don't always have to stamp in black or brown. You can do whatever it is that you can do. You can cut these out. You can tear out pieces, right? You can put some texture over there with some stencils. Again, you'll see how these stencils, not only do they work with Botanical, but see, they work with something vintage, and then a little bit of Ideology, right? To live your story. But what a great card, again, using the same set and only cutting out a few pieces, because fussy cutting isn't for everyone, right? But it doesn't mean that if you do it, you have to do everything. You can still do some things, or you can do, well, none of it if you don't want to do any of it, right? This one was a shocker. I'm not going to lie. I actually had to, I'm like, who made this one? You ready? Sharon. Sharon made this with all the colors of the rainbow. She went to the dark side and embraced the neutrals, and I couldn't love it more. It's just very cool to see all of these pieces. And this is that technique, smudge stamping, right? I've shared it many times. I love the idea of stamping with distress ink or oxide, and then immediately going in with a blending tool and smudging it out, because you get the detail and you get this awesome glow or halo of color. And you could go back and add more color with inks, but what a great use for a stamp set like this, where you're just creating that background, kind of like what Paula did with the floral outlines, right? Where you can go in and stamp, smudge, and then this is using the switchlet that I did with Sizzix. It's kind of like an impressive, but it's a die and embossing, so you have different seals, and perfect for that sentiment. But again, another great use for that stamp set, right? I couldn't ask for better results when I see the makes from the makers, because it's like every one of them is in my head of, you know, how they created and how they did, you know, what they did with the set. So Kath created this. Again, Kath loves color, pops of color, pink, orange, yellow. How fun to see this vintage set, very playful, right? Like a carnival, right? Makes me want to have cotton candy all day long. But again, monoprint with the stencil. See those numbers, taking some of that Noteworthy, but all of these pieces utilized in such a fun way, right? You don't have to love every image, but if you just don't overthink it, right? Thinking is overrated. Just go in and just start adding these images. Before you know it, you create a masterpiece from many different styles, right? From vintage to dimensional, to a background, to adding a pop of color. Or if there's just one particular image that just, well, it speaks to you, there's no surprise here. Vicky created this. We have this, well, if you guys have seen the live, it's all about the pointy finger, right? We have this in Ideology, in ephemera and layers, and I don't know, I love a pointy finger. It's fun. And Vicky created this card. I love her use of this. I think this is some serious masking going on, or some serious color, because although these look cut out, they are not. This entire thing is flat. Do you see that card? The whole entire card is flat, even the label, right? Because this is another stamp. This label set, again, one of my favorites that we did long ago with Stampers Anonymous, and none of the images are retired, so you can still get it. But what a great foundation to stamp that layer stamp, because there's many different of those labels. But here you can see in the background some stenciling, a little bit of that eccentric just stamped in the color. I love seeing that mirrored image of the 5. And then we've got these fingers stamped and what appears to be cut out, but they are not. Smoothie, smoothie, and then again, for skill and amusement only. Well done on the washers, right? Old school ideology. Love that little texture hammer. But great, what a fun card. Even if it's just a piece, right? An image that you're like, I'm loving this. And I know many of you left comments about like, I love the 5. See, it's kind of drawn into that. And you saw that from the work, like when Jeanette did, you know, that mixed media. You saw a lot of these pieces pop in because it's those kind of elements that just add that playful vibe. So let me just talk about a set like this, right? When it comes to a set like Eccentric, you can use it and love it in itself as individual components, right? Maybe that's not your thing. So I just wanted to share a little smoke and mirrors that I do sometimes when I'm doing collage, okay? It's going to seem like a cheat, but I don't think I don't think of it as a cheat, but I do this a lot, and I just want people to just kind of know how I do it. So I've done this before with all types of different stamps, because when I design stamps, one of the things that's important to me, and again, a shout out to Stampers Anonymous, is that I lay them out on this sheet, right? I lay them out of how they look on that sheet, okay? And so they really try. A shout out to Zach, who, you know, takes my art and actually makes it stampable, if you will. But I really like the layout of that, because to me, the set itself is art. And sometimes I have to compromise, right? This I would consider a compromise. I don't normally like things to be too wonky, but I wanted these this scale, and in order to fit on this sheet, I turned them sideways. But on something like this, I create a collage, right? I create a collage where I want things to be where they are, right? So if you wanted to weed a set like that, you could, but you'll see that even on like my field notes, I like to keep it in the set. And here's why. Because often I will do backgrounds with an image as a single image. And people are like, oh, that's because you have the art and you print it out. No, this is stamped. I stamp the entire set as a stamp, right? And you can do this with any stamp set you have, really. So here's how I do it. I used to have to use tape, and I used to get it everywhere, and it used to make a mess, but now I don't have to do that anymore. So let me just take you through and show you the cheat, if you will. I'm going to take my platform. I'm going to work with that, and I'll just use the case back here just for a little cushion. Okay. For this, I don't need my magnets, so I'm going to take that off. I do have a piece of media grip, right? This is the stuff released with Botanic. It's been sold out since it launched, so if you didn't grab it when it first came out, we did reach out to Botanic to see when it's back in stock. They said it's due back in early August, but they have a feeling that will already be sold out as soon as it gets in. So if you have the opportunity to, you know, pre-order something from a place that is out of stock or get on a list, if you want it, I would suggest it, because he feels that what's coming in August will already be gone within a week. And that's a great thing. I'm happy that you guys like this. To me, this stuff is like the best of the best. If you haven't seen the video on media grip, check it out, because it's definitely a great, valuable tool to have. So what I do with the set is, first I'm just going to take a paper towel and water, because I want to clean off my carrier sheet. I keep my stamps in a binder, which you guys know if you followed the studio tour. So you know that a stamp set usually rests on a stamp set. And if this has any ink on it, it's not going to work. So just a little bit of water to take off any ink that might have been in there from a previous set, okay? Then, as you also know, I've gone in and I've cut out my media grip to many sizes. For this idea, I now have a new size. I have a size that I cut of my grip to this. If you don't have this size, can you use several smaller pieces? Absolutely you can. It totally works, okay? But all I'm going to do is place the media grip onto, let me get this little hair off. Oh, come on. There we go. Onto this stamp set, okay? And this is going to essentially be my block. So I'm taking this whole entire sheet, I'm pushing it up against the stopper edge of the platform, and I'm laying it down, okay? So now this is going to be my stamp. right? Before I used to have to put tape, and then the tape I'd have to roll it off and use Goo Gone and all that stuff. But with the Media Grip, now it is my cling in between. So you just take a piece of paper. I like to cut it bigger than my stamp set because I'm going to cut this apart. If you're like, why are you doing this? Well, because I'm going to ink this. This is going to become many other things, right? Many other die cut things. But instead of taking the time to die cut and then stamp all the pieces, now I've got all this that I can die cut a bazillion little things, a seal, a tag, a background, it could be whatever. But that's what I was saying. It's the smoke and mirrors. It's the laziness. See, I wanted you guys to think, oh, wow, he used like 15 stamps on there. Yeah, I did, but I really didn't. Okay. The next thing you need to know is if you're going to stamp and you already have Media Grip in your platform, you want to move it to the bottom of your paper. You want to figure out like where, I'll just take off the platform just so you can see. I know that when this closes, my stamp is going to stamp down here and I don't want it to stamp on this little edge. So you'll need to just make just a minor adjustment of this piece of Media Grip. I just take it and move it down a little bit just because I don't want to stamp on the bump, if that makes sense. Okay, so I just lay my paper down. Also on the grip, no magnets. You could if you cut it big enough, but with the grip you don't need to use a magnet because it's gripping the paper. And then we're going to ink this entire stamp set. There you go. I'll turn it so you can see it in the camera. I'm going to use archival. I like to use the travel pouch for this because it just adds cushion, makes inking a little less noisy. Now you don't have to use archival. You could use distress ink. You could ink them different colors if you wanted to take the time to go in and, you know, ink this red and this blue and this whatever. So there you go. I agree. Scrapbook.com, like easy grab and create. It's totally right. Like having some backgrounds of your favorite stamp sets, whether they're flowers, whether they're this eclectic, it's just nice to have pre-stamped backgrounds. I like to do archival because then I'm not limited to what I want to do to it. Meaning if I want to ink this, I don't have to worry about my images bleeding later. So that's why I normally do this technique with archival. I'm also not too concerned of it being perfect because I'm going to cut it apart. So, you know, don't freak your freak. Don't get in your head that it needs to be absolutely perfect, but try to do a good job, right? Stamp with purpose, right? No CPR. Just use your fingers, because if you put your whole body weight on this, you're going to smush out the rubber and you don't want to do that. But it is, I mean, we are stamping entire sets. So you want to go several times around with different pressure points if you can. And then we're just going to lift this up. There you go. Nice. Are you stamping on print paper or cardstock? Oh, cardstock. I am stamping on white heavy stock. So if I'm going to stamp this, I stamp on Distress white heavy stock. It is a smooth paper. So it's a smooth paper that really transfers the images the best, in my opinion. Okay, because I want to be able to cut it apart and die cut it, and I don't want to die cut copy paper. That would be too flimsy. But if you were going to do, say, collage paper, right? Maybe you had plain collage paper. Lay a sheet of collage paper, and now you have collage paper of that design. All right, so you can see here that there's still some little skippity bits. For me, I would be totally good with that, right? Because I like the idea of having some faded pieces. But I can also just go in and ink this stamp up again. I'm not going to move it. I'll leave it on camera, right? And just add like just certain areas, and then just do a second stamping, right? Just to create some darker areas, and then there you go. Bam. Done deal. So it's really nice. Now, could this be inked ahead of time? Of course. You can do whatever you want to do. Could this be watercolor paper? Yes. Could this be craft? Yes, you could do whatever paper you want. But for me, the best results have been something super smooth, but also rigid enough that, as I mentioned, if I want to ink it, I can. If I want to die cut it, I can. Now, if I was going to do some watercolor effects, I'm going to be honest, when the white heavy stock first came out, it was really for wet and dry techniques. We found that there's different batches of white that get weird if you get it wet. It almost like kind of blisters a little bit. So I don't use my white, the smooth heavy stock, for water anymore. This was something that Jen Shirkus pointed out to me. So shout out to Jen who noticed that. It's hit and miss. And so really when we reach out to the supplier, they're like, yeah, but this paper wasn't designed to get wet. That's why it's just white heavy stock. So we have updated the packaging to kind of remove that term of wet. So my advice to you, if you have this, use it for stamping, use it for blending. You can still do a little bit of coloring on it, but if you're going to go into wet techniques, I would recommend mixed media because that comes in a sheet, or watercolor paper because it's really good. But for stamping on this, I'm going to do mostly my blending. I found that even if I flick water on this, it doesn't seem to be too reactive on it. So anyway, that is my tip for stamping an entire sheet. And then you could just go in and clean that off or do whatever. So yeah, you have so many different options for this. Now, if you are going to do individual coloring, right? So let's say you're going to go in with your mini ink pads, whatever. This would be a great thing for even watercolor techniques, right? Where you do distressing, you spray this whole thing with water and stamp and you have a watercolor background. Amazing. But yeah, that's kind of the fun thing. And then when you're done, well, I'll just take it off because it's here. You're just going to lift off your sheet, right? There's no adhesive because it's media grip. And now you take off your media grip and you put it in your cool little, these are my Simon pockets that I cut the sides off of. It's a perfect place to store because your media grip you want to store somewhere sealed, meaning, I mean, not sealed in a bag, but you don't want any dust or anything to get to that. If it does, you just rinse it off and you're back in business. It's not an adhesive sheet. It's actually just a grip sheet. So cool little trick, right? Smoke and mirrors all the way. But it's a great tip for that. So hopefully you guys found that. So now you're going to be looking at your stamp sets totally different now, like how it's laid out. You're like, boom, I'm going to stamp that and cut out my cards, right? It's just a great way to do it. But yeah, people used to think that I would run these through the copier, but didn't. I just stamped the whole thing at once because I didn't want to say like, oh no, I just actually stamped the whole set. Because this, like, I don't like to stamp from the set. I know some people are like, well, hello, Captain Obvious. I can just take this, right? And I'll just go in and push into this. If you push into this with your finger, you'll know. You blur out your image because this sheet is too flexible. So you would still need some sort of block. And that's not to say you can't put this down and lay a piece of acrylic, you know, forget the stamping tool and everything. You don't have to worry about the media grip. There are ways to replicate this without a tool, but you would want something solid over this because otherwise your finger pressure is going to squish through this cushion too much. All right.
I'll take that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to wrap up with my favorite set. And hopefully it becomes your favorite. I just love it. And I understand that it's a weird one. Some people just don't get it, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want you to just have an open mind about the power of a background that has texture, right? Because the texture can be used many different ways. I know that, you know, at a glance, if you were just looking at this online or just, you know, saw it in an email, you're like, what is that? Like, I would never use that. It's just, ugh. It's a very cool stamp that has so many different looks to it. So let me share with you what I love about it. I'll show you the makes and then I'll do a little demo. Again, this is the one set that comes with its own grid block. So just know that is already in the package if you get this stamp. So the cool thing about bubbles is that it can have a lot of different looks and textures depending on how you do it. And I'm going to show you the makes and then I'll share some different ways that you can use it. Okay. So this first card, Sharon created this. I love the idea. This is just like a little archival resist, right? Because this is on glossy paper. But inking this bubble stamp up in just different sections, right? Different areas with a color of ink. And this could be done with permanent ink, or this could be oxide, or this could be your inks. But I love the fact that, you know, archival is going to let you put it on a coated paper and then just adding that little sentiment. Again, this stamp, the scale of this stamp, right, is bigger than a card. So it's by design. So when you see it and you think, oh, it's a background stamp, it's not. It's bigger than a background stamp. That's why it's only one, and that's why it needed its own block to come with it. Because as a maker, I wanted you to be able to say like, okay, I want just the bubbles in this top area. Oh no, I want pretty much the whole background covered, right? Or I wanted this just to come in here on this corner, here on this corner. That's why it's got this fade all the way across, because if you change corners, you can change a different element as far as your fade to it, all right? So that's the cool thing about the stamp itself, right? It can be done in color. You can also just create something very collagey with this, right? So Jeanette did mixed media, again, just using this embossed in white, right? Very dramatic, and then using ideology transparency. There's some Sizzix die cuts in there, a little sparkle, just again, very mixed media, but bold in color and layer. I love over the metallic. And then inside, well, you can see that Botanic collage in there. And again, different layers, different textures. There's even some other ideology elements, photo booth, labels. Great little gift card holder. So that's a nice thing about cards as well. You know, sometimes we think that a card is just a greeting card, and it can be, but it can also just be an opportunity for you to slip in just a little bit of happiness. She actually put a note and said, here's a Starbucks card, and yes, it has some money on it to grab a coffee. So really sweet. So thanks, Jeanette. But that's a nice way to just present a card that's also a gift to a friend that just needs a little pick-me-up. But that bubble is really kind of, to me, the star of that background. It just brings your eyes into that, and then you see all this other little explosion of elements, right? Really cool. Then we've got this. I love just seeing kind of the industrial side of things, right? So Vicky created this card. Look at the bubbles embossed over this background, really grungy, really great metallic. I love seeing those element stencils, right? You do you all day long. That's what it's about, right? Machine heads from Ideology, just kind of those big corner elements that you can stick down. But I love that offset look of the stencil as well, right? Gives it an industrial vibe, and really just the addition to that Noteworthy right inside that number. I thought that was very, very clever to see that, right? But see how the bubbles could be grunge, right? So, you know, whether you're seeing it as a dramatic effect, a colorful effect, in this case, now we just see it as just grunge, right? I don't even see it as bubbles. I see it as some sort of cool, you know, eroded look to this metallic background. And that's what it's all about. Just having a different effect and a different look, right? Barbara created this card, right? So you talk about eroded and grungy and industrial. Look at this. It's so good. Like, look at that grit number. I mean, come on. Seriously? Look at that texture. Because we have an element stencil that just isolates one key piece, and this is just one life. Like, how powerful is that card for someone? All the inks, all the splatters, the oxide, all of that. But then look at how Barbara used the bubbles, right? It's not over the background. It's just using, like I showed, like you can just use little pieces and go around the edge, and you're going to get something completely random and fragmented as a cool element, right? What a great use for that stamp. So far, you know, you're seeing its kind of use many different ways, right? Now, this just amazing. Susie created this. Look at this. This is all fabric. This is just linen, but this goes from grungy industrial to a completely different, softer look, very botanical, very organic. So that's what I was saying about a background stamp like this. You don't want to underestimate its ability to really work with what you're doing. This book, Susie created just all these little pieces. These are all stamped on fabric, right? So you can see Noteworthy, you can see the little floral outlines, the entire cover, right? Take a look at that. That's done with bubbles. But when you see it, it has just a little wonderful, soft, organic look to the fabric, right? Like the fabric just has a beautiful look to it. Then we can see in here just all these great little patches. Again, stamped on there, trailing off the little, like the detail of this, unbelievable. Then you can see the Botanic Collage, again, stamped on fabric, sewn in, all these little tags pinned in, the little Ideology loop pins. There's so much stamping and detail, but this is all fabric, right? All textile. So if you're not into paper crafts or cards, maybe you like to do sewing, or you like to add a little texture, the power of stamps, because this is where I think red rubber stamps really make a difference. On something that is woven like this, right? Something with fabric, it's just going to always provide the most detail when you're stamping, even on something like linen. Beautiful. But again, you're going to see on these pages the repetition of the bubbles, right? Where they just come in as a background. It's just enough to give it kind of like that staining without doing it, really. You're stamping it. You're getting that look that you stained it and you did some marbling or you blotted some of it off, but you didn't. You literally just stamped that in color, and it's the bubbles that are giving you that look of that marbling or that little bit of batik. And so subtle, such a great addition to this. Love the flower. Again, the Noteworthy, you can see just those random images that pop in from Eccentric. It's crazy to see how all these sets really work together, right? You may have seen them as 5 individual ideas, but then when you see the makes, it's like, okay, I can see why like all of them were pretty important, because they can all be used in their own unique way to add to whatever your style or creativity is. So Susie, I just think that it's so cool. If you are into creating backgrounds like alcohol inks, Kubert created this. Look at how great this particular stamp is for alcohol ink. Alcohol ink has this wonderful ability to create fluid movement, right? You can use it with alloys, you can use it with foundry wax, but it does give you this flowy look to it. I love that bubbles will add to an element. Now this happens to be embossed in black, but this could also be embossed in a metallic. So even if you didn't use an alloy or a mixative, you could just go in, create a beautiful background with alcohol ink and then stamp this. And again, this, because of the size of that stamp, it covers bigger cards, right? You don't need, if this was that normal little 4x6, you wouldn't have the ability to create the backgrounds on larger cards. So I like just the pairing of the Sizzix bold text, and then we've got Be Fearless on there from Noteworthy, right? So cool, right? And then of course there's just that idea that I see and I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And I would have to say that I can't believe Jen Shirkus didn't think of this one. But Tammy B, this is Tammy B's card. Take a look at this. I mean, come on. Come on, really? Like when I saw this, and I even said to Paul, I'm like, this card. And so I love the idea of bubbles being that surf, that splashing of the ocean. I'm sure Jen's gonna be like, okay, I got this next. Like, so cool to see the blend of color, right? We have a stamp set. I'm not sure the name of this one either, but it has like underwater sea creatures. That's where the crab is from. Collect Beautiful Moments, but I love just the ink blend background, and then this being stamped, and again, that iron off effect, that batik, where it created that resist, but just creates that perfect ocean, right? Wow, like, come on, just super, I mean, I know, it's because really, I mean, and I said that before, there is beauty in simplicity. And while, you know, I'm going to show you a lot of different things that we can do with bubbles, and you've seen all the different uses of that stamp, it is such a versatile pattern that you just don't realize its versatility until you see it, right? Because maybe you do like to do a lot of nautical, beach, ocean, perfect. Maybe you love grunge, perfect. Maybe you love alcohol ink backgrounds, great addition to that. Maybe you love organic nature, ideal. Maybe you're looking for that really cool mixed media. This reminds me of, like, you know, that spray webbing paint that you would put on that gives those really thick coverage, great for mixed media. And then of course, as a colorful background, you can still blend color on a background. It doesn't have to be one solid color. And to me, again, seeing the representation from these makers that didn't even get together, because these are the cards for that stamp set, they're all completely unique, but they all have a very strong value of that, which is so incredible, right? So incredible. So let's talk about using bubbles. I figured it would be great to do a demo just on this stamp, just to give you some ideas of how I like to use it, but absolutely amazing, amazing makes for all the makers. Amazing, right? Amazing. Jeez Louise. Come on. Come on, okay. But that's, awesome. I say what I feel, right? And that's what I feel when I saw it. So I'm gonna put this on its grid block, because again, I prefer to work with this on a grid block. Okay. And then we're going to just talk about like the different levels of what you can achieve with this stamp, just in a very basic way, right? Because I think it is good to show you in a basic way. So let me pull this out. Here we go. Take this out. All right. I think we're pretty squared up. Good. Okay. Just because I'm going to do a little stamp, it's going to be easier to work on the surface that I normally stamp on. Okay. So there are many options of effects from a single stamp, and that's what I wanted to take you through about, like, how you can apply it in different mediums, and you can switch it up and try whatever different inks and papers that you want. Okay. If you go in with just distress ink, you're going to get great detail from bubbles. All those little speckles, all that little spray that's in this background, right? That is part of the stamp, right? So when you start looking at all those little dots in that rubber stamp, that's where the detail comes shining through about Stampers Anonymous stamps. Like, you are stamping a small little speckle. You're not getting this blob. And these lines where they fade in and out. Oh, look, Hidden Mickey. Hey, I love that. Oh, that's so cool. Look at that. You see all those little lines that fade in and out, or where that kind of comes together. That is what gives the authenticity of this stamp. And that's just stamped in distress ink on watercolor paper. Okay, it could be any kind of paper. If you wanted to change it up, if you wanted to give it more of a wet look, right? So something that is maybe not as outlined, see the difference? Something that's a little bit more fluid, maybe it does give you a little bit more of a bubbly look. This is simply spraying your stamp with water before you stamp it, meaning you ink it, spray with water, and stamp it. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'm gonna just grab a piece of watercolor just to show you, okay? And we'll ink this up. I've got a little assortment of ink and oxide over here because I'll use a little bit of both. And I think for this, I'll probably want to blend this one up with some ink. So I'm going to use two different browns, shocker, walnut stain and ground espresso. But just to show you, so we can take our inks and we're just going to ink this up. And I'm going to ink with purpose, meaning I'm going to tap, tap, tap because I want to get ink on there. Now, I don't like to overthink this, meaning even though my paper is smaller than my stamp, I want to pretty much ink up most of the stamp. So when I'm ready to stamp, I don't have to be like, where did I put the ink? But that's just me, okay? And I'm using two different browns. Ground espresso I did most. Walnut stain I just did a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit more here. Over in some other areas, right? You can see I'm just going to push some down. Actually, I want to get a little darker grunge over here. There we go. Let's do that. Okay. So again, if I were to stamp it now, it's going to give me this kind of look. But if I want it to be just kind of wet, I'm going to spray with water. Okay? So I'm going to take my distress sprayer, and I'll just hold it on to the camera so you can see. So I want to create droplets. Can you see that? See the reflection? Droplets, not just one mist. That's not enough, right? Watercolor is very simple, but it requires two ingredients, water and color. So if you don't have enough water, right, you don't want it dripping off of your elbow. That's too much, but you don't want to just do one mist. And that's what's great about the sprayer. You can get a nice, light, even coverage, and you can go several times over your stamp. So just going to dry off the mat. Normally I would do this probably over the splat box or something. Okay, you can have media grip down if you want. For this, I'm just going to go for it. So I'm going to place this over the back. I'm just going to see like where do I want the bubbles to kind of fade, right? So even though you have all this water, there's surface tension on there, so it's not gonna go raining on your card. You're going to place this down wherever you want it, right? You're just going to stamp with purpose, meaning I'm going to lay it down. I'm just going to use my fingers, but I don't want to hold it down too long because I want to lift this off, and I want these drips on the card. I'll show you. I'm just taking my finger, grabbing the card, letting it fall. So you see that. So you see this drippity bit that would freak people out. That's what you want. That's what you want for the watercolor look. So now I'm going to dry it. And the reason I say I don't hold it down there is if you hold your stamp down too long, the paper is going to absorb all of the ink and the liquid, and you don't get these blobs sitting on the top. And I want that. I really do. Do you have to use a heat tool? You don't. You could let this air dry. It would actually give you a little bit more variation of color if you let it air dry. Okay, but that's good enough. It's not crispy dry. So here's another thing that I like. So you see how it's dry, but I've got like some wet areas. I can go in with a paper towel, place this down to kind of absorb some of those wet areas, and that's going to make those spots lighter, although they would have dried darker because the ink was there. But now look at that background, right? Look at that cool, just mottled, splotchy background. This could be over something, or this could be under something. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go in with some craft. Got my cardstock a little over there. I'm good. It's fine. I'm going to just do a second generation. Not sure if I have enough stuff here, but we'll see in just a second. Spray with a little bit of water. This one, I think I'll go a little higher. Stamp. See, because there's water, you have to just give yourself like a little dismount. See that? Love that. Okay, I'm going to just dry this again, just so you can see it. Just a little bit. And I'm going to set this one aside. Now, could you just go in, because there's still ink, could you go in and just continue to stamp? You're like, oh, okay, I want some over here. Oh, I want some over here. Yes, because that image, and you're going to see, because I'm going to do another technique with lift, it's so open that it allows you to fill in the blanks, right? You just have to look at the stamp itself and just know that this area is going to be more open, right? Because you can see that it's clear. This is going to be more solid. This black area is obviously going to give you more of that solid color. So when you're filling in the blanks, you're not going to fill it in from the straight edge. That's why the solid is on the straight edge. You're going to fill in from this because it's all those little open areas that will allow you to overlap and it won't become mucky. Okay, let me just wipe this off. Just going to use a cloth. Okay, so that's if you're going to work with distress ink. Okay, you can create a lot of different great backgrounds by either using it wet or dry. And I love the effects, right? Colors, you know, if you want something light, this is frayed burlap. That's a beautiful light brown. That creates effects. Obviously, darker ones, we're talking walnut stain and ground espresso because those are darker. If you want kind of in between, you can just mist the stamp once, right? Misting the stamp, like if you kind of look at, let's just say, this sequence, this is going to be ink only. This is probably ink with maybe 2 sprays of water, and this was ink with whatever you saw, 3 or 4. So if you don't like it this wet, maybe you like it a little bit lighter, just use a little less water, but you need to have more than one little mist of water to do it. Now, if you go to oxide, oxide's going to change everything, right? Because oxide is dye and pigment. So what's nice about oxide, it's going to give you a much more opaque, softer effect when you're using it. So this is done, this is a beautiful one. This is saltwater taffy, just stamped. So there's no water on this one, right? Just stamped on there. This on craft, ooh, this is salvage patina. Definitely has an ocean vibe now. Now I just see like water and sand because of Tammy's card. But this is using oxide and wetting it, right? So let's take you through that. And we could do a lot of different colors too. What's up, Mario? Thought you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, here's a little chat about the water. I said we use distilled, but then someone said doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter. It's just that we use distilled because we don't like your stuff to get all gunked up.
Right, yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't react the inks any different, but where we live, we have really hard water. So it makes my water brushes get kind of gunky. My sprayer, it could clog it up. So yeah, that's what we use. But it doesn't, no, it won't change how your inks react at all. Nope. All right. So if we wanted to just go in and create a light effect, I'm just going to spray my stamp with a little bit of water first just to make sure that every bit of brown is off before I go to the next ink pad. If you wanted to just use white, there is a white in distress, okay? It is called picket fence, and I get a lot of people saying you need to do a white oxide. Well, there is no white oxide because there's really no white ink. This was before oxide. This ink pad was actually the catalyst for the idea of oxide, okay? So this came out before oxide even existed, which is why it's under the Distress Ink brand, if you will. But it really is a white pigment ink. But it's a pigment ink in a felt pad. And that's when we kind of learned that we could put pigment in this felt where it didn't have to be foam. And that's kind of what sparked a lot of really interesting ideas, okay? Interesting ideas when it comes to ink. So an oxide picket fence would be no different because an oxide needs to be dye and pigment, and this is only pigment. So technically it's not even distress ink because distress inks are dyes. But hey, this is before things get a little weird. But just so you know, if you're looking for white distress, whether it's ink or oxide, it is picket fence. It is one pad, and it is really essentially a white oxide / ink, but it has no dye because there is no white dye. White is a pigment. Okay, so I'm going to ink this up in white. White distress because it's still going to be reactive. So that's why I wanted to have a white, because it is going to still do all of those cool reactive things that distress is going to do. So I'll take this, I'm going to give it a couple sprays. There you go, just so you can see. There you go, there's water on there. And then I'll stamp this onto craft. So let's go a little higher here. Cool, again, stamp with purpose, lift it off. And we're going to dry it. Look at that. Oh, I love it. So what I love about a white distress is the fact that when you have a white distress, you can see those little tiny specks of really intense white. That's what I love about distress, because if you have a white pigment ink, and there's many white pigments out there, they're going to stamp a very even, smooth white because it's white pigment. The fact that this is it is pigment based, but it is not a traditional pigment ink because obviously it can live in felt. When you stamp it, you get all of that different kind of depth of white. It's not just completely flat. So It's just a cool thing. All right, I do love it. Yeah, all oxide roads leave. You're right, Mal. All leave. So just that's the white. So whether you want to call it ink or oxide, that's the only one. And it does what the oxide does. Obviously, when you get it wet, it turns whiter. But really, really beautiful. Like, isn't that so cool? And you can see it almost just has like a texture to it, but it doesn't. But yeah, that's beautiful. And you could get a second generation, right? So you could stamp and get a second generation on there because there's plenty of ink. Remember, it is distress, which means it's reactive with water, which means when it is reactive with water, it's going to become more intense. Can you use refresh spray on picket fence? You can. You can use refresh on distress ink, which includes picket fence and your oxide pads. Just don't use refresher as a re-inker. It's not the everlasting gobstopper. If you've used your ink pad, you need to re-ink it. If you haven't used it in 100 years and it's so dry, refresher is not a resuscitator. So sometimes you just don't use something, you use it or lose it. But you can try that first. But you know, they do have re-inkers also for picket fence, right? But this one, yeah, I mean, I hate to waste it, but I'm going to, just because I'm demoing. But yeah, you could stamp this a second time, definitely. And it just cleans off with water because it's really an ink with pigment. Confusing. Okay, for oxide, let's go into some salvage patina. Okay, gonna add some of that color. And we'll just do a couple of stamps on this. It's really good. And we're gonna do a little crushed olive. Why not? Okay, just because I wanna mix up some colors. I can. Okay. Again, we'll go into craft. This is going to be kind of fun. I'm going to spray this with water. Now, I spray it with water because oxides react with water. They oxidize. So what is creating this vivid look from salvage patina as well as picket fence is the fact that we sprayed it with a little water. If you don't spray an oxide with water, it won't oxidize. So it just has a nice pigment value to it. So when I'm working on craft especially, I just like to add a little bit of water. All right? So I'm just going to spray that, and I'll just stamp around. Okay, here we go. A little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and I'll do a little bit here. Okay. And we'll just start there to see what we get. Excellent. Now, what you need to remember when it comes to adding layers, if you're layering on craft, is that this particular stamp lays down a very small amount of ink, especially on the outside edges. Remember when I talked about this, right? That this is going to be not as intense as this area. So that's what creates a really nice subtle effect where it's almost like, you know, old school sponge painting, right? If you don't want it to look like bubbles and you just want a stamp that's going to have some texture to it, this is a great stamp for this because you just keep using all the parts on the stamp, but dry it in between. Dry in between your layers because otherwise everything's just going to become a mucky mess and all your lines will connect. Okay, so by drying it in between, that's just keeping all of the individual lines separate, right? So there we go. Really simple, but a cool background, right? So to me, this doesn't even resemble bubbles at all. It just has some great veining or marbling, which brought me to the next idea, okay? Because as I was playing around with this, I'm like, oh, well, hold on. That's pretty cool, right? I started thinking of this really more as texture than even bubbles, right? Because we've already seen how bubbles appear on the paper, right? Just stamping it. So when you change mediums, it became super interesting to me, right? Because I'm like, okay, yeah, I get what this stamp does, and I love what it does for cards. I mean, we've seen that, but using it on things like alcohol ink, wow, that's a little different, right? So this, although it's a bubble stamp, I don't know, I don't see that in here because maybe because it is alcohol ink and alcohol ink has that fluid movement to it. This, because I'm using lift ink, I'm actually going to lift off my alcohol ink, creates a very cool effect or depth in alcohol ink that I've only ever been able to achieve before with plastic wrap. If you've ever seen that where you put alcohol ink down on your background and you take a piece of plastic wrap and you wrinkle it up while the ink is wet and you let it dry and you peel it off, that's how you've kind of created this effect before, but certainly not all of these perfect little cells. And that's what I love about using this stamp with alcohol ink. It's not, to me, it's not bubbles, it's texture. Now, because I'm using lift ink though, I was able to also not only get this texture, But then I can kind of go double duty and use this on glossy and actually stamp the bubbles. If you haven't seen lift ink, I'm going to demo it right now, but you can lift it off of this and then stamp it. So I was able to get this background, but then I still got the bubble stamp. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go. So this isn't going to be an alcohol ink demo. If you haven't used alcohol inks before, you can check out the video and a lot of videos out there of how to use alcohol inks. But I started with Yupo, right? And I just did a bunch of different ink backgrounds on Yupo. I will say that, you know, if I'm sticking with a specific color palette, I tend to use the giant bottles of ink, right? If you're just doing a few backgrounds, use the small ones. But like this, again, if you want to get into serious making, right, where you're doing a lot of colors, like this happens to be, I think this is Monsoon, Moss, and Laguna. Let's see, Moss and Laguna. So those three. A little blending solution, and then I just went to town. So this is nice because I just used my glass mat, put a ton of ink down, and just, you can go, go, go. This is actually 3 of, I don't know, maybe 9 backgrounds that I did. So it is nice to have big bottles. It doesn't come in every color, but I don't think you need it in every color. So that's what I have. I've got just some blended backgrounds. Let's see, which one do I want to lift? I think I want to lift this one. This one's interesting to me. It already has kind of an ocean kind of look, okay? Over here I have a piece of glossy. This is glossy cardstock, different than Yupo. I'm going to use that as my off stamping paper. I find that to be the best, even better than regular cardstock or matte cardstock, because the glossy is actually going to like take the ink off of the stamp better than regular cardstock. So that's what I'm going to use as like, let's say my clean off, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take our stamp. I want to make sure that it is clean. So because I use Distress, I'll just use water and a towel. If you have archival on it, make sure you use archival cleaner to clean, because we want to start with a clean stamp when we're lifting. Very important. If you have any kind of ink residue on your stamp, you're not going to get a great lift, okay? So we're going to use alcohol lift pad. There's also a re-inker for this that you can go through Stencils. A million ways that we can use lift ink, especially with stamps and stencils. But I wanted to keep this this whole live under 10 hours. So, all right. So I'm going to take I'm going to take my lift ink and I'm going to ink up my stamp. Ink with purpose. Okay. And this is a clear ink. So, well, it should be clear, you know, unless your stamp is really dirty, then your ink pad won't stay clear like this. But I clean my stamp just whenever I'm using lifting. All right. And I want to be fairly generous in a sense of, I don't want to squish it on there. Too much lift ink is a disaster. But tap, 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 and make sure that everything is coated. And you see that I'm like turning my ink pad in different directions, because although these are flat, sometimes, you know, there might be a little imperfection in it, and it may not transfer the way I want it to transfer. All right. So next you're going to decide where you want to stamp this, or how much of it that you want to stamp. And I want to stamp a pretty good portion of it. So I'm just going to take this, place it over my Yupo. And this has been inked with alcohol ink. It's dry, doesn't matter. You can do any kind of backgrounds that you've done. Stamp it, leave it down for a couple seconds, right? Because we want the lift ink to do the work, right? We want it to, it's kind of eating through that alcohol ink right now. And then we're going to peel it off. And you should have to like peel it off like a fruit roll-up. There's our ink on there. There's our alcohol ink. And there it is lifted from the back. And right now you don't see that it's lifted, because with lift ink, you have to do the heavy lifting. Okay, it'll do some of the lift, but you have to do the heavy lifting. This is Viva. I talk about it all the time. If you don't have Viva, use some sort of soft, absorbent paper towel for this. Okay, first thing I want to do is I'm going to place it down over the background flat. Just use my hand. I've seen Paula's used a brayer for this as well. I just like to take my first lift flat, okay, just to get some of that, most of that lift off. But then I'm going to take this and I'm going to start dabbing over the top. I'm lifting the ink, and you're going to kind of see this background like almost develop like a Polaroid, okay? And each time I'm dabbing, I'm taking off some of that alcohol ink, so I want to go to a clean part of my paper towel. So I'll dab a little bit, and then I'll just flip it around, inside out, dab, dab, dab. And you want to keep going until when you look at your paper towel, you don't see any ink. If you see that you're lifting ink, that means there's still lift ink on the background. And the reason you did this is because if you were just to go in and stamp it and wipe this off, you're going to take that lift ink and smear everything, and you will not have a crisp image at all. It will look like a hot mess. Okay? So dab, dab, dab. Look, see, there's still ink coming off because there's a lot of layers of alcohol ink. Obviously, the more layers you have, the darker, the more you have to lift off. So, you know, if you're doing backgrounds, you may not want to try to lift something that has, I don't know, 10 layers of ink. You can. It's just going to take quite a bit. There we go.
All those hearts and loves for your demos.
Oh, thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
Come on.
Come on. Looking for that Mickey in here. I don't see him. All right. Dab, dab, dab. So now it's pretty clean. I don't see any color. So now I'll take the paper towel and I can just wipe off any little excess. And it does come into a little bit more focus. Oh, there it is. I saw it right there. See, now I'm going to try to find it every single time I use it. That's so fun. So look at that background. Whoa. But see, on alcohol ink, I don't know. It has a different property to it. Now, I can see so many different scenes in this. It's just a beautiful effect for alcohol ink. Now, we still have this, right? So lift ink, it's great property. Besides it lifts, it actually takes the alcohol ink that's on your background and transfers it to the stamp. But the alcohol ink, because we can normally never stamp with alcohol ink, it dries in seconds, but it's actually trapped between this and the stamp. It's got a layer of lift in between. So it will allow me to go in, this is again, glossy cardstock, right? And I can stamp this. Look at that. And I can get all of this color off of this stamp on this background, right? Just using whatever is left, and I'm not being concerned about lines or any of that. I'm just stamping, and this is already dry. And take a look at that. Whoop, whoop. So cool, right? Beautiful and so much softer, right? And I love the fact that it's on glossy, which means that I can stamp on this. I can do all sorts of distress. I can do all sorts of things. But what a great background this is for using. So again, so many different ideas for bubbles, right? And then there's one more, and then I'll be done, I promise. But I wanted to share that too, because I think sometimes, and you know, this is nothing against Ted, really. I love Ted to death. But I understand that sometimes I'll submit art, and he's like, are you sure? Like, you know, are you sure about that? Because like, you really want to commit to like one stamp with that big thing. And I'm like, but Ted, like, you know, when you see it, you see it, but you know, you can't be in my head, and it's a good thing because it's scary up here. But I just see the possibility for something that just hasn't been done and I think needs to be done. So I just cleaned it with archival cleaner. That's what I've been doing while I'm talking. A little archival cleaner and some water.
Staples?
Yeah, Staples was one of the very first stamps that I did for Stampers Anonymous. When he didn't even know who I was, I did Staples and scratches, and they're like, what is that? Yeah, I'm like, oh, they're Staples. And he's like, seriously? You could draw that with a pen? I'm like, or you could stamp them. And it was really a popular stamp.
That was
It's
so funny.
old school. So funny. Okay. All right. So another thing we can do with this stamp, you know, besides doing alcohol ink and all that, this was a technique that I shared over the holidays, inspired by a technique that Stacy did, where it's double stamping. Some people call it kissing. Some people, it's about taking a stamp on a stamp. And she shared it on her blog. I shared it on the blog. If you kind of recall, using the perfect plaid, right? Taking the perfect plaid, using these stamps. There's bold tidings, right? So take something bold and stamping it with a plaid, right? So I remembered this technique, and then I was like, I wonder what it would look like with this stamp. Well, let me tell you, sweet mother of glory, it's magic is what it is. So I took some Halloween, and take a look at how cool it is through these words. It's like the perfect eroded, grungy text, because the imperfections are spectacular. So I'll show you how to do that technique again using this stamp now instead of the plaid. But this could be with any kind of background. But would you ever think to take this and just stamp it over the text? Look at that. That is cool. And this doesn't have to be creepy grungy. If you did pretty colors, it could be a very pretty marbled pastel. It totally could. It's completely up to you. But yeah, my brain just like, I wonder if, I should try that. And that's what I do. I can't help it. All right. So I'm going to take a piece of cardstock. Let me grab a piece of cardstock. This one, I think I want to do smooth. Yeah, I'll do smooth. Heavy stock is the best. And again, there's more in-depth demo technique for this. Let me grab a piece. I'm looking for all my stuff that I seem to, I throw off to the side. There we go. I'm just looking for a sheet of grip. There we go. Because I'm going to stamp on a card and, all right, let me just clean this up. I'm going to get into the stamping part. I don't want it to be too, a little water, clean up the glass, because there's some ink on there. All right, just because I don't want my paper to go everywhere. So I'm just going to take a piece of media grip, put it on the glass. I already have it cut to my card, right, ish. So this way my card is stationary. So when I stamp, I don't have to worry about it getting all wonky. So we'll take Trick or Treat. That's going to be a great one. And I'll place it onto my grid block. I'm just going to line that text up with the grid line. Easy enough. For this technique, it's best to use an oxide as your base color and ink as your top color. That's my preference. And I've done a video where I shared all the difference about ink and ink, oxide and oxide, archival, so you can learn more about that. But that's really kind of my preference. Oxide for the base, ink for the top, right? So I'm going to take my text and I'm going to ink it up with the color of oxide that I want. In this case, it's carved pumpkin. I like that. It's a nice Halloween orange. You could use spice marmalade. You could use whatever. But brighter colors are better for this technique. If your colors are too dirty, right, like crackling campfire, it's not going to show up as well. So go bright on the side if you're going to do this technique. Then I'm going to take black soot distress ink, and I'm going to ink up my stamp. Now, honestly, you don't need your block for this one, but it's already on the block, so I'm leaving it because I'm going to leave my stamp rubber side up for this technique. And I'm going to ink this up with distress ink, not archival. Really important that it is distress. And I am focusing in this area. I'm not doing the whole stamp because I know just where I'm going with this one. Okay. And I'll take my stamp, decide, okay, where do I want this to be? Okay, I think I want it to be here. And I'm going to stamp into the black. I'm going to lift it up, place this down, and stamp. Give it some good pressure, let it sit for a second, and then peel this off. Sweet mother of glory, look at that. So cool, right? I mean, look at just those great crackle, grungy bits that just appear like they're meant to be. So it's like having a stamp, because sometimes I've designed, stamps that have a crackle to it, but how great. And again, you can do this with so many different backgrounds, right? Polka dots, plaids, that's really, I think, what sparked a lot of people. But bubbles gives a whole different thing, because, yeah, because it's a crackle effect. And I just think that it's really, really perfect for this. I love the idea of that design. So, yeah, to me, that's, I think, what makes stamps, stencils, so worthwhile is, sometimes you look at images and you see that. Hey, JT, see
Come
that
on,
he's
JT.
got it. Come on. That's the thing about stamps. You see stamps and sometimes you see an image, and that's why, even though we did it, I love having a live. I love having makers share their inspiration for imagery, because you can see a set and not totally understand its purpose. And then you see the makes, and then everything just kind of comes in to focus. So yeah, that was good fun. Bubbles, you can see, bubbles is my jam. I'm telling you, it's one of those things that, I love the versatility of the background. But yeah, all the makes, just absolutely spectacular.